Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
A warm breeze was blowing through the open balcony windows, and the full moon illuminated the entire space. Vanessa was sitting on a small warm blanket, and her eyes filled with tears. It had been exactly 1 month since her young husband had left her. Not even a day had passed since their wedding, and she had already discovered that her new hubby had managed to get a mistress before they were married. O was sitting gazing at the moonspots, the full moon clearly visible tonight, and she was holding a photograph in her hands, the same photograph from her wedding. Vanessa seemed to have already melted into that photo, for she had never been separated from it since her divorce. She looked at the photo again with tear-filled eyes, and the tears welled up again. So happy, so beautiful. Who would have told her that it would all end like this, or that she would catch her spouse for treason just on her wedding day? The young man was hotly kissing another, hiding with her in the gentleman's room of the restaurant, where the wedding feast was being held. More importantly, he was not only kissing a stranger. She was kissing Vanessa's best friend, the friend Vanessa had offered to be a witness at her wedding. The friend Vanessa was proud to call her best and closest friend. She looked at Luna again. Contemplating the image of herself and her former lover was beyond her. Of course, when Andrew, Vanessa's husband, was caught red-handed, she began to recant. It was all her. She did not want to hang around my neck until the end. Even in the gentleman she came. Screaming young man. Screaming in her heart, screaming. So there was no doubt in the mind of the young lady. Probably not her fault. It was all her. She had seduced him. Naively thought Vanessa, and of course, forgave him. The wedding took place, and it never crossed none of the guests' minds that there was a third person lurking in the newlyweds' relationship. A happy family life never came together. After only 5 days, Andrew confessed his passion for another woman and asked for a divorce. Why did he marry me? Vanessa kept repeating the question over and over again. Why did he have to marry me? Why did he lie that it wasn't his fault? Was there an answer to these questions, or would she never find one? She rose from her chair and leaned against the windowsill, breathing in the cool night air. He put his hand to his chest. She wore a pendant around her neck. It was a pendant Andrew had given her before they were married. She touched the jewel and smiled involuntarily through her tears. Maybe all was not yet lost, she thought. After all, he never took his gift from me. The pendant had its own story, interesting and even frightening. Andrew had inherited it from his great-grandmother. The large diamond pendant was worth an unprecedented amount of money. Andrew's great-grandmother managed to save it during the Civil War. The Andrew family came from a maternal line of nobles, and this pendant was the only thing that reminded her of her relative's former wealth, although his relatives could have sold it long ago. Perhaps the proceeds could have been used to buy a couple of apartments in the city center. But Andrew and his parents respected their roots, as these jewels were inherited only by women. Andrew's mother insisted that the pendant pass into her hands. At their wedding, the young people had maintained a friendly and then closer relationship for many years, since adolescence. No one doubted their love for each other. Or was she spinning a jewel between their hands? The image of Andrew immediately surfaced in the memories. What a dear favorite, she thought wistfully for the umpteenth time. How could he do this to me? In the girl's head did not fit everything that had happened. She didn't understand why he had left her and why she had left with her best friend. Kelly had been Vanessa's best friend since kindergarten. The girls grew up together, developed together, and even the parents of the boys' girlfriends were friends with each other. Kelly had watched Vanessa and Andrew's relationship begin. She had seen how they had fallen in love, how they had dreamed of getting married and having children. Why had she had her eye on him? After all, there had always been plenty of men around. The double betrayal was harder to bear than it might seem at first glance. After her short-lived marriage and hasty divorce, Vanessa had lost herself. She had lost everything she held so dear. Still so young, she didn't know how to move on, how to learn to trust someone again. She let go of the pendant. She looked at the photo again. Her eyes glistened with tears again. Or was she about to throw herself back on the bed, choking back sobs? After all, for the entire month since her divorce, all she had been able to do was cry. She stepped out onto the balcony and headed for her room when suddenly the doorbell rang loudly. And not just any doorbell, it was literally crowded. Vanessa looked at the clock, which read exactly 2 o'clock. Her heart pounded to the beat of the knocking on the door. Her head suddenly ached from the unexpected and annoying sobriety of the call. Maria, the girl's mother, peeked into the parents' room. Or what was wrong? "Are you sleepy?" she asked. "Tie your robe." The woman yawned. In truth, the frozen fear in her eyes betrayed excitement. Who was it? Who could it have come to this? "Andrew?" Vanessa exclaimed, without calling my mother to finish the sentence. She was bouncing in place like a little girl getting a new toy. Interrupted by the insistent 3 chimes of the doorbell. "It's Andrew. He's come to make amends." "I knew it. I knew this would happen." Mary flinched as she heard another knock on the door. She lowered her voice, looked puzzled at her daughter Vanessa. "Shut up. What, Andrew? He has a new love now. Forget it, please." Once again, she couldn't finish the sentence. The insistent ringing of the doorbell and the pounding of fists on the door were terrifying. The woman became entangled in her robe, her hands trembling with fear. She grabbed her daughter's hand without opening it. "We don't know who it is. It's Andrew," cried Vanessa, coming back from her mother's arms. She ran to the door, not letting go of the photograph from her hands at her mother's screams. She, without even looking through the peephole, hurried to open the door insistently for that visitor. Who was flying by? The girl, contemplating the face of the man who had arrived. Her hands trembled with renewed vigor. When she realized that another person had arrived, the man entered the apartment with a confident stride. He was followed by 3 other strangers or males and 3 neighbors known to the family on the landing. The first man squared his shoulders, reached into his pockets, and shoved a square of cardboard in the girl's face. "Vanessa here lives the operative, Police Captain Benjamin." He opened a booklet confirming his identity. "I have a warrant to search your apartment." Vanessa was speechless. She looked at the people who had come to see her. What exactly was going on? The girl didn't understand. Maria immediately stood behind her back. What was wrong with her? "Worried?" asked the woman. "On what grounds do you want to search us?" The man smiled and put a document in the hands of Vanessa's mother. The woman looked at it quickly. Then she looked at Vanessa's daughter. "It says here that you are a thief." She barely spoke in a voice that Vanessa seemed on the verge of fainting. "She's a thief. She has to be. There must be some mistake." As the young woman tried to come to herself and realize exactly what she might be guilty of, the men entered unceremoniously. Starting to turn everything upside down, they covered everything. Shelf after shelf and drawer after drawer were opened, shaking and tossing books. They trampled dirty boots, shields, carpets. With absolutely no regard for any standards of decency, they shamelessly opened cupboards and overturned and threw all their contents on the floor. Even the fridge was carelessly tossed, with perfectly good, fresh food on the floor. Vanessa didn't know what to think. Every once in a while she tried to catch her mother's eye, but she looked away, then looked questioningly at her neighbor. Maybe she could explain something to her. The neighbor? The kindly old woman in her 60s nodded and walked a couple of steps away. "Oh, Velichko," began the old woman in a whisper. "How can that be? You're a good girl, but why do you need that jewel?" Vanessa narrowed her eyes. "What are you talking about? I don't understand anything. I'm so nervous. What's going on?" The neighbor opened her mouth but didn't have time to say anything. "I understand," shouted the man who had come in. "It is necessary." The old woman nodded and returned to the company. Or was she thinking about jewelry? She, like her mother, continued to dutifully follow the search. Watching in horror at the mess they were making when they had already rummaged through almost the entire floor and obviously hadn't found anything worthwhile. Vanessa raised a shaky voice. "What are you looking for? What are you looking for? I didn't steal or anything," she said, trying to silence the trembling in her voice. "Where are the jewels, Citizen Vanessa?" asked one of the agents, looking sternly into the girl's eyes. He seemed to be trying to read something in them. He averted his gaze to Vanessa's mother. He looked at her judiciously. "Maria, aren't you ashamed of yourself for raising a thief?" she asked defiantly. From indignation, the woman lost the power of speech and stammered. Yes, you. I would never do that," she repeated, reaching with her voice. Vanessa smiled to herself, noting with amazement. He is an excellent psychologist. She looked at her mother again and realized bitterly that she could not be expected to support her. Maria was the kind of person who valued public opinion more than anything else in the world. And when she learned that her daughter might be a thief, she literally turned green. If Vanessa turned out to be a crook, her mother would have no problem giving her up. "Why would I want a daughter like that?" Aloud, Maria kept making excuses. "I raised her to be a good and kind person. I didn't teach her to steal. It's not my fault. She's completely crazy with her Andres," she shouted. Vanessa unconsciously looked at the photograph she still held in her hand. This action immediately attracted the attention of the policeman. "What is this?" asked Captain Benjamin, stepping forward. He abruptly snatched the photograph from her hands. Vanessa was stunned. She couldn't remember herself without the photo. The captain looked at the photo and then looked carefully into the girl's eyes. "What do you want pictures of this man for?" he asked sternly. "Do you wish him harm?" His gaze swept over Vanessa's face. "He is my husband," she shouted, holding her hands to her chest, as if instinctively defending herself from the unexpected aggression. "The ex is your ex-husband." The policeman corrected her. How did he suddenly catch a glimpse of the girl's neck? He shouted and pulled her hand towards the frightened Vanessa. "You haven't had time to resent it." She, as the man ripped off the pendant with a sharp movement, tearing the chain around her neck. He raised his hand victoriously with the pendant. "I found it," he shouted victoriously. "Let the witnesses record it. Have you seen it all?" The people concerned nodded their heads, and Vanessa's mother squeezed her heart. The man looked at Vanessa critically. "I thought you were smarter to at least hide it." "I would have guessed it was stolen merchandise. And you?" She turned around and waved her hand at him. "Stupid. Or did the protesters wave their hands?" No. This pendant was given to Andrew by my husband. Ask him, his mother. Ask him," she screamed, and shame on her for lying. One of the policemen spoke up. "This pendant belongs to Kelly. According to our records, she's currently Andrew's fiancée. Did you steal it?" Captain Benjamin looked menacingly at his employee. He was silent for a moment. Benjamin muttered in a muffled tone, turning to Vanessa and mechanically repeating endless sentences. "Citizen Vanessa, you are a suspect in a grand theft case. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. You have the right to an attorney. In the absence of an attorney, you will be provided with a public defender. Be prepared. You must follow us to the investigation department. Bring your passport, a change of underwear, and personal hygiene items. You may bring your own cup and spoon. Everything else will be given to you by your relatives according to the approved list of things authorized for transfer. Hurry up," he added in another harsh, arrogant tone. He elbowed poor Vanessa in the back. 2 minutes to get ready. She had no choice but to do as she was told. It was like a blur. One last look at her mother. "Mom screamed under her breath, and I did it. You know it wasn't my fault." "Maria," she lifted her chin. "You're not my daughter anymore," she said in a cold, judgmental tone. It was at that moment that Vanessa realized that from now on she was on her own. This was how she had been sent to jail for nothing. It turned out that Kelly had been her best friend. Vanessa filed a complaint against her. And not only did she file a complaint, she had to provide irrefutable proof of the embezzlement, as it was written by the police and then in court. Kelly, without batting an eyelash, claimed that Vanessa had allegedly blatantly stolen the very expensive pendant, or incidentally, a pendant given to her by her everyday husband. Kelly charged that the pendant had allegedly come to her as a gift following the dissolution of Vanessa and Andrew's marriage. And Vanessa went to the friend's apartment, made a fuss, and, taking advantage of the general commotion, made off with valuable jewelry. As proof of the separation brought a video in which Vanessa entered the apartment of the best friend. Nothing would have happened. But that day, Kelly herself called Vanessa at her apartment. They were still friends, or not. In any case, Vanessa had already suffered a terrible double betrayal and had been brutally framed. Basely and shabbily framed by those she trusted the most in the world. The girl had no money for a lawyer. After all, her mother, as well as the rest of the family, had abandoned Vanessa. They seemed to have forgotten about her once and for all. They decided that the criminal could no longer be their relative. So they had no problem cutting the poor girl out of their lives. And Vanessa was left alone, abandoned, betrayed, unwanted by the lawyer provided by the state. He didn't do his job, and Vanessa was sentenced to 6 years in a minimum security penal colony. In court, she tried to justify herself, tried to prove her innocence, but all to no avail. During endless proceedings, the judge would not even listen to her. And in the case, there was more than enough evidence against her. Somehow another proof of her guilt appeared. An unknown witness of Vanessa's had appeared who had seen her running away from the stolen pendant all the way home. How was it possible to realize that a person was running with a small stolen piece of jewelry? How could one realize that it was stolen if you don't even see the jewelry? In short, Vanessa had suffered a crushing defeat. Jail was not something she could avoid. At the end of the trial, she was quickly transferred from the remand center to a colony not far from her hometown. Vanessa had no support, money, or energy left for the rest of her life. When she learned of the final court decision, Vanessa realized that her existence had lost all meaning. Thoughts of suicide began to visit her unstoppably. However, she still managed to hold on to the desire to live. Vanessa had set herself a clear and important goal: to find out who the unknown witness was. To get out of here, find out, and get revenge. Revenge on all those who had so cruelly and ruthlessly trampled on her life. In case that was worth finding out too. So you decided to live. What's wrong with you? Asked a large adult woman is sick. Then you need to go to the hospital. The woman stepped back, away from Vanessa. It was one of her cellmates. Fortunately, Vanessa had no problem in this scary community. What was she so afraid of? Look, no Russian. In such a place you cannot show your weakness. Her new comrades told her. After hearing the story of the arrival of the newcomer, Vanessa answered the question about her well-being, trying to put on the most friendly smile. I think I have poisoned myself a little. I think the porridge they gave us yesterday must have gone bad. How do you think you're feeling? I don't know. I'm all right, I guess, she said. Her name was Emily, and she had been in prison for almost 3 years. In Vanessa, the woman could see her daughter, for she was almost a lifetime older. As soon as this frail little girl appeared, Emily took her under her massive, and she did not allow anyone to offend the newcomers. This tall, burly, red-haired woman was always helping the unfortunate. Of course, she was no match for them. After all, she had no knowledge of life in the colony. Emily herself was serving time under the same article as Vanessa for robbery. True, Emily committed her crime, and she wasn't ashamed of it at all. She once worked as a programmer and managed to hack into the bank account of a large company where she worked. All the stolen money Emily transferred to the account of one of the private orphanages. After all, she knew very well that the company made its profits completely illegally. However, law enforcement authorities failed to appreciate such an ability, and Emily was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Emily gave Vanessa a stern look. Maybe you're right. My stomach is used to this food. Yours is not yet so strong. It's true that she is pale and yellow-green. You should see a doctor. Honey, you should. Repeated Vanessa. She had the last word. I'm getting worse and worse. Vanessa was taken for a medical examination. The doctor, after seeing the finished tests, came to Vanessa's room, very disturbed by the vision. He examined the patient and took another look at the sick list. Are you aware of what is happening to you? Asked the doctor in a concerned tone. How could you have missed something like this? Vanessa staggered out of the room. What's weak? She asked. I've been poisoned. I just have a weak stomach. Not in a harsh tone. Vanessa's doctor replied. Are you pregnant, or did you just get out of the hospital bed? Colorful spots popped in my eyes. Inside, everything twisted with a new bout of nausea. From what? She immediately looked down at her stomach and wondered. How could she have missed something like that? Had a crazy idea crossed her mind? Or did she look questioningly at the doctor? Are you sure? Of course, the woman replied confidently. Do you even know who the father is? Vanessa was offended. Who does he think I am? Of course I know. I've only had one man, my husband. But I'm not interested. When you give birth, you will give the children to the father, if there is one. Or already was. She wanted to start explaining to this disgruntled woman that she was divorced, and that in fact, the father of her future children had fraudulently put her in jail. For suddenly, she almost fell off her bunk from astonishment and shock. Okay, stop, children. You mean yes, Vanessa replied in a calmly nonchalant tone. Are you expecting triplets? Vanessa's whole life seemed to flash before her eyes. She thought she was about to end her existence. Are you kidding? How is that possible? Crushed, she hugged herself and rocked sitting up. Just a little more. And she's doing her voice. So already life is ruined. It's the worst. And then there's 3 kids. I could go and hang myself, honestly. I have nothing to do but joke with the prisoners. Not without squeamishness, the doctor replied. How can I get in touch with the father of her children? Vanessa, we are divorced, she replied. I don't think it's possible to give the children to him. And I don't want to. Aya, I'm going to have an abortion. You're not having an abortion here. The doctor told her matter-of-factly, you're going to give birth as a baby. You don't have to. They'll put you in an orphanage. A brutal November day. During the night, the prisoner Vanessa gave birth to 3 tiny, weak, premature babies in terrible agony. Immediately after the births, which took place in the colony's own internment center, they were separated from their mother and taken to a specialized maternity ward, which is part of the prison system of the Penitentiary Department of the Federal Penitentiary Service. To everyone's surprise, all 3 survived and returned to the colony where their mother was. Vanessa spent 2 weeks in the hospital. Valeria had a fever. No one needed her, and with inflammation of the uterus, she was taken to another clinic. When it became clear that her case was a disaster. Helped all the same Emily, who raised a terrible fuss, threatening to pass through his lawyer to the appropriate complaint about the conditions of detention of sick prisoners. Having come to her senses after the operation, which she had undergone urgently, Vanessa reconsidered its attitude to these children and did not write an application for their abandonment. Understand, you will never have the opportunity to have your own children again. She was convinced by another doctor, kind and considerate, unlike the one who had been indifferent and dismissive to Vanessa in the colony. Think about it. Life is unpredictable. One day it's black, the next day it's clear, and you won't have other children. But how will I raise them? Vanessa cried. I have nothing else. Even my own mother abandoned me, and you say that's a plus. It's up to you. The doctor shook her head. But if I were you, I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss it when Vanessa and her children are finally strong enough to be discharged from the clinic. The same doctor arranged for them to meet. After seeing her daughters, she had 3 beautiful babies. Or she just couldn't give them up and burst into tears again, seeing how tiny, wonderful, and helpless they were. Gritting her teeth, she decided she would get through it somehow. Don't worry, Emily told her when they saw each other again at the colony. You're the mother of many children now. You'll be released early and you'll get all kinds of benefits from the state. And I won't leave you. I'm in love with you, you fool. She turned away, trying to hide her eyes from them. We'll figure it out. Vanessa hugged her older friend gratefully, her throat constricted in spasms, preventing her from uttering words of thanks. Of course, the children were housed separately in a room specially designated for such occasions. They're all babies born in the colony were raised with state resources, as in orphanages. Mothers were given a certain amount of time each day to feed the children and interact with them. Vanessa, who survived a difficult birth and subsequent operation, had no milk. But she gave her cats all the tenderness she had lost more than once. The oldest of her sisters, the firstborn, Vanessa named Emily after her cellmate and new friend Helen. She had always liked that name. Long ago, as in another life, when she was still with Andrew, they had dreamed of naming their daughter Helen. Vanessa named her third daughter Betty after Andrew's mother. Vanessa and her mother-in-law had always had a very good relationship. She had a much kinder disposition than Vanessa's mother, and she always showed her future daughter-in-law a touching concern for her. Although Vanessa had no proof that Betty was not implicated in the story of her unjust accusation, somehow she knew for certain that Andrew's mother had had nothing to do with it. Unconscious, weak, based on nothing. But such a nice feeling nestled in the soul of the young mom she knew. She was safe, kind. Betty couldn't have done that to her. Or she could have, flipping the gruesome story back and forth. Vanessa changed her mind every few days. It all seemed so strange. Time passed. The days dragged on, slowly and painfully. Vanessa did not have the most serious article, and the general regime colonies are a much less harsh place than the Strodacha, as the old inmates used to say. But this unjust imprisonment in the colony, it seemed to her a real hard work. Or he counted the days and even hours, dreaming that he would finally get out of prison and could breathe fresh and such a smell of freedom. Worn behind bars, the children, strangely enough, gave Vanessa a gift. The new hope gave her a will to live, a will to develop, to make their lives better and more worthy than hers. She was well aware that she could hardly find a decent job because of her criminal past, but she knew that for the sake of her children she had to cling to this life tooth and claw. Vanessa often thought of her own mother with tears in her eyes. She kept wondering how her mother had been able to abandon her so easily when she herself had become a mother. The questions for Maria came even more, or she didn't understand how she could do that to her children. After the birth of the babies, life seemed to shine with new colors, despite all the negativity and blackness her day-to-day life had become. Now Vanessa was waking up with no tears in her eyes. She had set a new goal. She had found a new meaning to her life. Now the young woman had two constant goals: to raise her children and, of course, to take revenge on her abusers. "You have talent," said Emily with admiration in her voice. She watched Vanessa's work with interest. The women worked together cutting and sewing. And if Emily did her work rather mechanically, without any interest in the work, the latter was fully involved in the labor process. "Thank you," the girl replied. Embarrassed. "I like it too. I like the way it looks. I never thought sewing could be so interesting." "You're the only one who thinks so," Emily replied, with a quick glance at the rest of the workshop. "You see how good it is in prison. You've done what you love and found it," said the woman with a smile on her face, or a frown. You can say either way. You're right though. Vanessa enjoyed being a partner. In her normal life, she never thought working with her hands could be so satisfying, especially after a prison sentence. Studying in high school was out of the question. Vanessa, at her mother's insistence, enrolled in college right out of high school. The girl never liked the major she'd had chosen. No wonder, because her future profession was not chosen by her, but by her mother. Vanessa entered the law school and studied there for the first 2 years. True, as it turned out, the knowledge she acquired did not help her avoid dishonest imprisonment, and she was never really attracted to it. Prospects of becoming a lawyer, Vanessa was more attracted to some freer creative professions. Already at the age of 5, the girl expressed her desire to become a fashion designer, and if the father or supported his daughter, the mother rudely ridiculed her dream. Years later, Vanessa realized that there was no point in arguing with Maria, and there was no support in the form of a father. The girl's parents divorced when she was 10 years old. Unfortunately, she had to give up her own dreams and obey her authoritarian parents. Education cost her a lot, but Maria was adamant. "Either you study where I tell you, or you are not my daughter," she shouted. It's funny, but now Vanessa was completely free to choose her own path. Her mother had given up on her anyway. The pity, of course. She had to endure the restriction of that very freedom under such harsh and even unbearable conditions to be free to choose. Or maybe it was her parents again. He realized for the first time that Maria had always been a kind of unloving woman who did not give her own daughter the attention she deserved. She was an overbearing, unscrupulous woman. And Vanessa, upon reflection, finally realized that her mother's actions were more than expected. And Vanessa's father was also a rather peculiar man. "Hey, Vanessa." Emily planted herself right in front of the girl, waving her palm in front of her face. "I said, have you applied for parole yet?" "Eh? Yes," Vanessa replied, slowly coming back to reality. Right after Vanessa gave birth to her children, Emily gave her the great idea to apply for parole and try to shorten her sentence by having 3 children, as well as good behavior and productive work. "I didn't even have time to tell you," Vanessa said guiltily. "The administration came to see me recently and offered me this option. If all goes well, I'll be able to complete only a third of the entire course." And Vanessa put aside the jacket, to which previously lazily reached the zipper, and she looked carefully at her friend. "What now?" she asked. "How am I supposed to go on living?" Emily glared at her. "What do you mean, how are you supposed to go on living?" She laughed lightly. "You're so young. What's wrong with your head?" Oh hunched her shoulders. "Where am I going to go? I have no one left. I'm alone with 3 children. I have nowhere to take them." "Come on." Emily shook her head patronizingly. "Do you really think your mother won't take you back? So you did your time. What's the big deal? A mother always takes her child back." "Yes, girls." Emily looked questioningly at the other inmates. "Of course she will, of course she will. I would love my daughter even if she killed someone." Another person's voice was heard. Vanessa shook her head. "No, you don't know my mother." "I don't think I can accept the rabbit's daughter." It's okay," said Emily, conciliatory, with her hands in the air. "But your dad, where is he?" Vanessa wondered again. She hadn't seen her father since her parents divorced. At first, she had pounced on him, demanding that her mother let her talk to her father. But she always refused. "He doesn't need you," Maria kept repeating. Over time, Vanessa got used to the idea that she couldn't maintain a relationship with her father. "No, he doesn't care about me either," she said sadly. Emily rubbed her chin thoughtfully. "Well, and the father of your children for no reason." In a curt tone, the girl replied, "He set me up." All right, calm down." Emily laughed. "Then we'll have to figure out how to get back at him." Vanessa was slowly but steadily approaching her target. It seemed that the starting point she needed was very close. Vanessa could breathe. The fresh smell of freedom was very welcome. The girl was well behaved, probably even perfectly better than most of the young women in the colony. She had never smoked in her life and had never been in conflict with other inmates. She always complied with all the demands of the administration with courtesy and compliance. She complied perfectly and even over-complied with the work rule. Vanessa was already 1 year and 8 months old. Her daughters were growing up. Vanessa's sewing skills continued to develop at an accelerated pace. Sometimes strange and even frightening thoughts would come to her mind. From time to time, Vanessa realized that she felt much better in prison than at home. Here she had made real, loyal friends. Here she saw her children for the first time, kissed each of her daughters for the first time, breathed in the smells of their little bodies for the first time. Here he could finally do something he really loved. Here she was able to realize many things, less and less often. Vanessa thought wistfully of Andrew. Of course, she was still choked with resentment, but not with such a terrible and overflowing force. Time passed, and she could think of him without tears in her eyes. But one of the questions that had tormented her remained unanswered. Why did he do this to me, she thought. Why did he want me to go to jail? She didn't understand her ex-husband's purpose. His reasons for doing something so despicable to her. And Kelly, what was she missing? Why would he do something so despicable to someone so close to her? Vanessa couldn't let the situation go. Not only couldn't, she didn't want to. Her thirst for revenge was growing, her gaze a red, throbbing veil. When she thought of how she would take revenge on her assailants, her blood ran cold in her veins, and her heart pounded as if some happy event was coming very soon. Thoughts of revenge gave him strength. They illuminated her thorny path. Why were you asking or turning your head sideways? Don't you want to get out of here? My girl Emily stretched out her arms as usual. Of course, I want to get out of here, but I have slightly different circumstances. What are those circumstances? Vanessa looked slyly at her friend. Do you have any secrets from me? Emily laughed. She's too little for that kind of talk. We'll talk about it later. How can I be away without you? Vanessa asked sadly, changing her playful tone. I wish we could go out together. I wish we could be together. It's not over yet, honey, Emily said good-naturedly, pulling out a good cigarette from somewhere. We'll have it all. It had been almost 2 years since Vanessa had been transferred to the correctional facility, and she had begun serving her sentence thanks to her good behavior and the excellent recommendations of the prison authorities. Or was she on parole? She had served exactly 1/3 of her original sentence. Considering her stay in the detention center, sometimes Vanessa would think how fortunate she was to have had her stay in a not at all pleasant place so significantly shortened. However, then she would quickly come back to the reality of this term, and it was not to be with anger. The girl thought, for Vanessa was not at all sure that there was still a place for her in this world, let alone a place for her daughters. For now the girls had to be left at the colony. There was such an opportunity for a short time. Vanessa said goodbye to her daughters with tears in her eyes. It was unbearably painful for her to leave them. But there was no other option. They simply had nowhere to go together. When she finally emerged from the barbed wire of the compound, outside it was burning frost itself. She took a deep breath of the cool, frosty air. It seemed strikingly different here in the wilderness than it had been outside the colony walls. Nonsense, certainly, Vanessa said aloud and smiled at the comparison. Taking a deep breath, her nose felt protected from the cold. She had dreamed of this moment so much. She had imagined it so many times, she had counted the minutes until she was free. And here I am, Vanessa thought. But much to her regret, the first few minutes of freedom did not bring her adequate pleasure. The young mother was still worried about her children. How are they doing without me? Are they okay? Vanessa looked again at the high walls of her recent prison, where she had spent the last 2 years of her life. Her hands trembled treacherously. Her head was pounding. What awaits us, she wondered. Finally, summoning up his courage, he climbed up the authentic, narrow, clear, snow-covered path. Her first destination was the bus stop, from where Vanessa was going to return to her hometown, as she had no other options left. At Emily's insistence, she decided to talk to her mother again. If she could forgive her for something she had not done, and Vanessa, proudly turning her chin, headed resolutely towards the agreed place. The bus, full of silent and very sullen people, had already crossed the city line. Vanessa held her breath. How has everything changed here, she thought, looking anxiously out the window. She wiped herself from time to time. The glass in her palm was sweating with excitement. She watched the faces of the citizens, looked with interest at the buildings flying by, looked at the city as if she was doing it for the first time. The bus had already entered downtown, and Vanessa gasped with joy. Christmas was coming, and everything was decorated with big bright garlands, LED lights, and big Milky toys. The city was brimming with twinkling lights. It was bustling and cheerful. It revealed to the ex-convict her solemn side. Vanessa couldn't contain her emotions. Is it so beautiful? She commented aloud. Shut up, she whispered to a woman sitting behind her, and you're not allowed to sleep here. Vanessa was immediately embarrassed, tucked her head between her shoulders, and fixed her gaze on the window. The bus was stuck in a small traffic jam, and she had a good opportunity to look out the windows of the cars next to her. In each of them there was someone sitting, whether it was a driver alone, a husband and wife, a mother and daughter, children in the back seat. Happy families were on their way somewhere, rushing to buy everything they needed for the upcoming New Year's Eve. O was so engrossed in her simple task that a sudden sharp, continuous sound made her jump in the seat. Her heart beat with renewed vigor. Her mind immediately began to replay memories of the day the unfortunate woman had been held in her mother's apartment. She looked toward the car. With what involuntary alarm? She asked aloud. Good heavens, replied the woman sitting behind her. Calm down, it's just a car honking. A wedding is a wedding. Vanessa looked out the window with renewed interest. Happy people, she thought, trying to calm her racing heart. And she began to search with her eyes for the wedding procession. Finally, the traffic jam cleared and Vanessa saw a cavalcade of expensive white cars decorated with various bridal paraphernalia passing by. What was the strength of the others? Running forward, a smile froze on her face. an ex-convict not long ago, and herself the same. She headed toward the succession of cars that continually signaled her own wedding with a mixture of interest and sadness. She watched the cars go by until she saw the main one. The procession was circling the newlyweds' car when the celebrants in a long white limousine, decorated with silver roses with warriors, branches, and rings with a bell, matched the bus. Vanessa's mouth dropped open in amazement. It was the same car she and Andrew had ridden in for their wedding. She took a quick glance at the memorized number combination of 3/8, dispelling any last doubts. What a coincidence, Vanessa thought. And then she saw him blink. 1 second, one blink. But to the woman it seemed like that very instant. It lasted an eternity. Time stretched out like chewing gum. The newlyweds' car seemed to take forever to overtake the bus. And behind the wheel, Vanessa managed to make out Andrew, handsome and smiling, dressed in a luxurious suit. It was definitely him. He had always loved to drive and had been behind the wheel at his first wedding, and this time he made no exception. And next to him, Kelly in a lush white wedding gown, deep neckline, fur cape, shiny uncle in her hair. Or it seemed that their gazes met, and Andrew noticed her. She thought he had caught her gaze and looked at her as he had once looked at her long, long ago. Vanessa wasn't sure she hadn't imagined that look, but she wanted so badly to believe it. She wanted to feel that he hadn't forgotten her. As if in slow motion, the moment of their meeting poured all thick golden honey over an invisible plate of memories. A shake of the head or the realization that warm feelings for her former fiancé had migrated into a thirst for revenge. The feelings and Vanessa seemed to flare up with renewed vigor. It even seemed to her that Andrew was looking at her with his former warmth. Was he even looking at her? She clutched her head and a throbbing pain settled in her temples. "What's the matter, child?" A worried voice was heard. A woman who had been sitting behind her got up from her seat and approached her. Or was she still holding her head, looking at her feet? "I'm fine." Her head is spinning. She squeezed out a heartbeat. Hers cleared. Her head was spinning more and more. He tried to lift it up, but to no avail. On top of everything else, he also felt nauseous. "Calm down. You're having a panic attack. Take a deep breath. Look at me," in a calm, reassuring voice, the woman told her. Vanessa had time to think that the voice sounded familiar. And then Betty looked at her. The woman held out her hands in surprise. "And Betty, it's you. I didn't recognize you." "Yes." Vanessa was in complete shock. Standing in front of her was her failed mother-in-law, Andrew's mother. She looked at her former relative. How she had changed, Vanessa thought, in the more than 2 years since they had seen each other. Betty seemed to have aged about 10 years. Tired eyes down to the ground and cheeks. Deep wrinkles. "What's the matter? Are you like this?" The girl spoke softly, still holding her head in her hands. "Oh, Vanessa, what has become of you?" The woman asked, ignoring the question. She must have been thinking the same thing as Vanessa herself. Indeed, she had changed a lot. Prison leaves its mark on everyone. "I just got out of juvie today," or shoulder opening. The dizziness disappeared and the resentment and thirst for revenge returned to my heart. "I was in jail." With defiance, I said, "Because of your son, because of you. You were the one who insisted I have the pendant." "Why did you do it, Vanessa?" The woman quickly interrupted her. "I know, I just couldn't change anything." "Yes," she laughed derisively. "Then why didn't you testify in court? Do you realize what you've done?" Her anger began to rise with renewed vigor. "Why are you doing this to me?" Betty, guilty, lowered her eyes. "I understand. Poor girl." She put a hand on Vanessa's shoulder, but she pulled away abruptly. "Take care of yourself. Don't trust anyone." With those words, Andrew's mother turned and headed for the bus doors. Or did she? "And you're leaving like that," she shrieked, paying no attention to the other passengers. Without explaining herself, she suddenly fell silent, realizing that she had missed some important detail. "Wait, this bus. It's only coming from the colony." "What were you doing in the colony?" "Stuck?" asked Vanessa, not trusting anyone. The woman repeated her words and got off. The doors closed and the bus continued on its way. Vanessa didn't have time to get off after she looked around. Betty had been in the wrong neighborhood. Where was she from, and why was she so different? A sharp rise from her seat made the girl sit back in her chair. Her head was spinning again, nausea creeping up her throat. What the hell is going on, she wondered. But she no longer had the energy to search for an answer. After a couple more stops, a worried Vanessa got out and headed in the direction of her mother's house. She walked through the door and upstairs. A feeling of nostalgia came over her with renewed vigor. It seemed as if the last 2 years had never passed. Vanessa had just run out to the store, and now she was returning home, to the apartment where she had lived most of her life. She stood in front of the door for a few more minutes, shifting from one foot to the other, unable to press the doorbell. Finally, he gathered his strength and rang the doorbell. A second time, a third. When I rang for the 10th time, in desperation, I thought, why won't he open the door? Where am I going to spend the night? And I started pounding on the door with my hands and feet, hoping my mother would open it for me. I am her daughter. I will prove that I am not a thief. She thought and knocked on the door for the last time. When she realized that no one would open the door, Vanessa slowly settled herself by the front door. She didn't know how long she sat there. She lost track of time, but she heard the elevator doors open. And there she was. Maria approached the door with a businesslike air until she realized that Vanessa was sitting on the floor, dead, lost, dressed in old, tattered clothes. The young woman's skin had thickened, her eyes had become harder, and her whole appearance denoted wariness and weariness. In 2 years, Vanessa had begun to look much older. Mary, on the other hand, had blossomed. The woman looked younger. She wore an elegant baggy coat over her shoulders. The skin on her face had stretched and her hands glistened with large, expensive jewels. "Mama," said Vanessa in a low voice. "It was you, Maria, who faltered." And with a sharp movement, she corrected her fur coat. "Girl, I don't know you," she blurted out suddenly. "Mama, Mom, what are you doing?" "It's me," stammered Vanessa. She got up from her seat and held out her hands to her mother. She abruptly removed her palm from her horse. "You want me to talk to bums too?" She shouted and got out of here. "I'll sleep somewhere else. If not, I'll call the police." Vanessa poked her nose out. "Yes, but call them." "I think you've forgotten that I also reside here." With a challenge in her voice, the girl said. Maria smiled slyly. "Only I am registered in my apartment. I am out of here." She thrust her hip at her daughter and began to unlock the apartment with the key. "Mom, it's me. It's your daughter. I don't have any children." The woman replied coldly. She opened the door and rushed inside. The huge iron door slammed shut, literally in front of Vanessa's nose, with blood in her veins. The former detainee froze. Of course, she had thought of all sorts of scenarios. She imagined her mother insulting her, yelling at her, calling her a criminal, demanding an explanation. But what would it be? Vanessa was in shock. Did her mother really not recognize her? Still trying to get home, she pounded her fists on the door again. "Open up," she shouted, with all her might. Or she knew perfectly well how much her mother cared about her reputation, especially in front of the neighbors. She knew she would not allow her name to be slandered in any way. Vanessa kept banging on the door and thinking to herself, "But either let me in, or she'll call the real police. I don't care. I am a resident here. I have a right to be here." The door finally opened again. "Get out of here. I've already called the police," said the woman, holding on to the door with her hands. I looked inside the apartment and was shocked. No doubt it had been renovated. Everything so luxurious, so beautiful. The hallway is finished with decorative plaster smothered in mirrors and various interior tidbits. "Mom, what's going on? Where did you get the money for such a renovation?" asked Vanessa in surprise. "None of your business. Get out of here." Maria shouted, peering through the narrow gap between the wall and the chain-locked door. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Where? You know I'm not home anymore." "Go back the way you came," the woman chattered. "That's it. Wait for the police." She screamed and slammed the door shut. She almost pinched her daughter's arm. What monster? Vanessa began to boil like the cauldron, when again there was the sound of the elevator opening and the district police officer appeared. "What is going on here?" The formidable man rubbed his stubble and chin. girl, leave the place. This is my house. I'm not going anywhere," Vanessa said firmly, crossing her arms over her chest. "I'm registered here." "That's right, but now we'll figure it all out." With those words, she disappeared through Maria's doors. As much as Vanessa wanted to, they wouldn't let her in. About 10 minutes passed. Vanessa was crouched on the stairs in expectation. Finally, the neighborhood agent came out of the apartment and headed toward her. Embarrassed, he ran his hand through Vanessa's sparse blonde hair. "I guess," he clarified. "Yes, let me go home." "I have nowhere to sleep tonight," Vanessa replied indignantly. "There's the thing." He cleared his throat and looked away, as if ashamed of what he was about to say. "Have you been discharged from this floor?" "I'm sorry, but by law you have no right to be here. You have to leave." To which Vanessa stretched indignantly. "But how? Is she my own mother, my own apartment?" "Yes, honestly I was surprised too, I admit it." She furrowed her brow. "I'm really sorry, but you better go." "But go where?" "I've got nowhere to go," Vanessa whispered, trying to shake off the coma that had crept up her throat. The policeman called the elevator. When he arrived, he waved them in, inviting the girl to follow him. "Come on, I'll help you." Vanessa made it through the night in the shelter. The kindly policeman could not leave the poor woman on the street so easily, and cordially offered her a place to stay in his house. He and his wife, like Vanessa, had 3 young children. When he brought the former bunny home, his wife gladly welcomed the stranger, fed her, and kindly provided her with something old but warm. And for such necessities, she provided the girl with a cot. The next morning, Vanessa took a shower, changed clothes, ate, and tidied herself up a bit. A new, even more difficult journey awaited her, although the policeman's wife had insisted that she stay with them as long as necessary. Vanessa did not want to abuse their hospitality. Warmly thanking her rescuers, she pulled herself together for the trip or left the apartment and walked to the bus stop. Once the first scare had passed, she realized that she could have rented a cheap hostel. He had money on his card, which he had earned in the colony, and he was grateful again for the kind policeman's delicate help. "I'll have to thank them later when I can." He thought about it and put it on his mental list of priorities. At last, the bus arrived. After paying her fare, Vanessa made her way to someone she hadn't seen in many long years. She was on her way to see her father when Vanessa stepped off the second-to-last bus. Large snowflakes immediately fell on her eyelashes. She looked around and whispered aloud. It had been many, many years since she had seen her own father, but she remembered exactly where he lived. "After her divorce, my mother managed to keep the apartment for herself, and my father had no choice but to move out of town." Her parents, now deceased, had a large and cozy country house. That, at least, was how Vanessa remembered it. As a child, she had loved to spend her vacations here. But after the death of the elders, the family completely abandoned the plot. But since Maria left her ex-husband homeless, the man had to move to live in the city. Or business, he looked and moved on the usual route. The way to this house he remembered by heart. He walked along the snow-covered path from time to time, almost fell on the slippery turns, on the high snowdrifts. The frost bit into her cheeks, her hands were slowly beginning to fail her. But Vanessa had no intention of stopping, for her father was her last hope. She didn't know how he would react to her sudden appearance. She didn't know if her father would remember her. She didn't even know if he still lived here. And if he did, her thoughts immediately began to race through her mother's words, "He doesn't want you. He doesn't want to talk to you." But maybe she had already changed her mind. After all, Vanessa was no longer that little girl. She was an adult and independent. What if she had another family long ago? Or would she still find a place for her daughter who had problems with such contradictory thoughts? Vanessa was approaching the area she needed, and finally the roof of a familiar house came into view in the distance. A sea wind approached, conquered with renewed vigor. A real blizzard seemed to be approaching, or the faith of friends. Neck to neck stood in front of his father's property and scrutinized the shaft. The house seemed to look much better than she remembered, or wasn't sure, and she watched the fence, figuring out how to get in. Vanessa remembered the old village fences as low, rickety, barely holding a line. Now, however, in front of her was a tall, blank picket fence on brick pillars, and it was no longer easy to get into the parking lot. I was looking at the door. Yes, luckily, he found the doorbell. Hesitantly, he pressed the button and backed up a couple of steps. He looked around again. Would it open? I wondered if Vanessa would remember me. Finally, I heard the crunch of snow under the feet of a man walking. It was clear that someone was approaching the door. Vanessa's heart froze and the door opened. A tall, stooped old man appeared through the door. His head was erect. Deep wrinkles under his eyes betrayed solid age, and he looked longingly at her father. He looked nothing like she remembered him. "Dad, it's me. Vanessa. Will you let me in?" The woman replied hopefully. She took a step forward, but she was too shy to approach her father. Her mother's last behavior had left a terrible mark on her. "Vanessa," she was surprised. "Daughter, is it really you?" "You recognized me, Dad." Vanessa smiled with tears in her eyes. "How could you not recognize your own son? Come in, sweetheart, how I've missed you." "Oliver." Vanessa's father held out his hand and gestured for her to enter, and Alia hesitantly stepped onto the property. She looked around. The path to the house was perfectly cleared by pure Russian apple trees. The white snow lay beautifully. She followed her father, entering the house, and her hands trembled slightly, nodding excitedly at what could be expected of him. After so many years, so many betrayals, or was it that she could no longer trust anyone? They entered the house, and the face immediately promised cozy, homey warmth from the open fireplace. The cozy living room was soothing, and Vanessa immediately wanted to collapse on the couch. Forgetting about everything in the world, she took off her snowshoes. Her father immediately provided her with soft, large, oversized slippers. He took off her jacket, grabbed her by the shoulders, and finally looked her over from head to toe. "Vanessa, my child, is it really you?" he asked again, and in the corners of his eyes froze tears of happiness. "I'm a daddy. You won't throw me out?" Vanessa asked uncertainly, shyly, averting her gaze. "What are you talking about?" He looked worriedly at his daughter. "How can you throw your daughter out? Come on, hurry up. Am I glad to see you? I confess I thought you had forgotten your father." With these words, Oliver dragged the girl with him. He sat her down at the big wooden table and began to run around the kitchen. He put the kettle on the gas stove, took several snacks out of the refrigerator. "I'm so glad to see you," he repeated over and over. "I never dreamed I could look at you just one more time." Vanessa sat on the kitchen couch, tucking in her father's frozen legs. She took the mug with something warm from his hands and couldn't start a conversation. "Dad, but you didn't want to see me," she said quietly, and there was a lump in his throat. "A lump? You've left us. What's the surprise?" A teaspoon slipped from his hand with a clink. "I did. What are you saying?" "What else am I supposed to say?" "Mom told me everything, how you left us, how you found another woman, how you never wanted to see me again, how you refused to pay alimony." She turned away from her father's surprised gaze. "I would never have come to you just like that. I have nowhere else to go." She sulked apologetically. "Vanessa, what nonsense are you talking?" He was really surprised by his daughter's words. "I asked for a divorce first, but I was divorcing your mother." "Honey, not you. And I didn't have any other woman at that time." He shrugged in bewilderment. "Every one of those days during all the long years we were separated, I thought about how my daughter was doing. Every day I kept trying to see her." He fell silent, biting his lip. "Your mother, she is a peculiar woman." You can't imagine how bitterly Vanessa replied. "Wait, I do not understand anything. Why did you get divorced?" "You see, at some point with Masha, with your mom, it became simply impossible to live. I remember one day I came home after work. You were just a child, and she started yelling at me, accusing me of cheating on her, although I never cheated on her. I swear. And then she said she didn't want to live with me anymore. That day I felt it in my bones. Something had happened, something had changed. From that day on, I was a different person, angry, cynical. She wasn't the same woman I married." "What are you talking about? What happened?" Or did she step forward with interest? It seemed to her that her mother had always been as she knew her. What did her father mean by that? She looked at him intently. You mean you never told him you didn't want to see me? Why didn't you pay alimony then? Did I? The man replied. His eyebrows seemed to run across his forehead in surprise. I always paid. I wrote you letters, gave you presents every holiday. Look at this. The last words reached Vanessa from the new opening between the kitchen and the bedroom. Dad ran into the back of the house, rattling boxes in the distance. Then he returned with an armful of papers. Look, Vanessa incredulously reached out to look at the papers. He really did pay, she observed in surprise. They were bank statements showing that Oliver had been transferring a decent amount of money into Maria's account each month. She took a quick glance at the statements, and then an old letter caught her eye. She recognized her mother's handwriting on those sheets. What was it about? Vanessa asked her father in a low voice. Without waiting for an answer, he began to read the letter. Her eyes widened in surprise. Her mother had written in it, among other swear words and angry accusations against her father. We don't need your credentials and letters. Vanessa said she didn't want to see you or hear from you ever again. She said she didn't want a cheating father. We laughed out loud reading your stupid writings. You never showed up in our lives again, and you made us sick just transferring money to support her. Goodbye. After reading these lines, she looked away from her father. What is this? Asked Vanessa. Did your mother write this to you? Yes. Oliver sank into the chair next to his daughter. I've been trying to get in touch with you for a long time. I could hardly believe that a bright girl like you could say such words, but your mother was adamant. She forbade me to talk to you, and the day I decided to wait for you after school, she found out about it and threw some bullies she knew at me. They beat me up so badly that strangers called an ambulance. Thanks to them, I couldn't reach you, Vanessa. The only thing I could do was wait until you were old enough to make your own decisions. I had a big smile on my face, and now finally I have waited. But how have you lived all this time? You tell me. Wait, or did you shake your head? I mean, all this time, Mom wouldn't let me see you and lied to me about child support. She lied to me about you not wanting to see me. And she lied to you about me not wanting to see you. But why would she do that? The girl asked in surprise. Your mother is lovely. She's changed a lot. I don't know what exactly has happened to her, but it's a fact. She's such a good person now that it's dangerous to confront her. I did my best and stepped aside. I'm sorry you had to go through all that time thinking that your own father abandoned you. I didn't mean for that to happen. Why are you so calm about all this? Vanessa was outraged. Aren't you the least bit surprised by this act? It's horrible. Where did he put the alimony money? We lived pretty poor after his divorce. Every time I asked him to buy me something when I was a kid, he would yell at me that my father didn't pay child support and there was no money. You realize I'd almost hated you, or did you jump out of your chair? Before, I wouldn't have been able to believe that your mother was really capable of something like that. But now, why would you say something? She shouted at her father, unable to stand his calmness any longer. Your mother is like that. There's no controlling her. Forgive me again for everything. The father took his daughter's hands and looked her in the eyes. Have you grown so much? Tell me how your life has been going. Vanessa, helpless, leaned back in her chair. Oh, Daddy, I don't know where to begin. That night, Vanessa again told her father everything that had happened to her over the years. She told him about her childhood, how she had fallen in love with Andrew, and how mean he had been to cheat on her. She told him about Kelly, and Oliver was very surprised at her behavior because he remembered her as a child. Vanessa told him all about her incarceration in the women's colony, about life in prison, how she suddenly discovered she was pregnant, and how she barely survived. She gave birth to the triple Anya. Oliver listened to his daughter and could not believe all that such a young woman had to go through. She told how her mother supposedly didn't recognize her, how she had left the apartment. At the end of the story, it seemed that the father's already gray eyebrows had turned even paler. He said quietly, "My poor child. How sorry I am that I could not keep you safe." And she turned away from her father, hiding the tears. Wasn't it your fault? It was Andrew, her mother, and Kelly. They set me up. Oliver frowned. You met Andrew's mother on the bus. I thought, from what you told me, that he didn't want to hurt you. Yeah, well, he got out of it. If he hadn't, he wouldn't have testified against me. I'm pretty sure she was the anonymous witness. That's what the coroner told me. The identity of the witness is kept confidential in the interest of the investigation. Who else could have done it? I don't know, honey, but I think this woman can be trusted. Dad got up from the chair he'd been sitting in. Well, morning is morning. I'll get your room ready for you now. You go to bed. Tomorrow you and I will go get my granddaughters. They must not live in an orphanage as long as he lives, so the girls will be here with us. O looked at her father gratefully. Thank you, Dad. She stood up and followed her father up to the second floor. There Oliver prepared for Vanessa her old room, where she had slept as a child, and she fell asleep. As soon as her head touched the pillow, the night passed peacefully. Her last thought was, my God, I can't believe I'm going to pick up my daughters tomorrow. Vanessa stepped out of the car. The bright sunlight immediately hit her eyes and the frost got into her bones. She was back in the place where she had spent 2 whole years of her life, back at the front door of the women's colony. But now the reason for being here was much more cheerful and a faint smile. The frost seemed to freeze on her face. The impending encounter with the children could only lift her spirits. She passed through the security point, was issued the necessary pass, and at the entrance to the children's building was immediately greeted by the prison nanny, as all the bunnies who had children here jokingly called this kind woman. Vanessa opened her arms to give her a hug. You take care of the girls. You found a good place for them. Yes, Vanessa replied with pride in her voice. I reconciled with my father. He has his own big house, and we're going to live. It will be fine. I'll be able to raise my kids. That's great. Nanny nodded happily. What about the job? Or are you ashamed? Not yet, but I'll find one soon. I'll do what I can for the children. I'll do what I can. I understand. You're doing great. Good luck, child. And she was taken inside the walls of the orphanage. And there she finally saw her own children. The little ones were as happy to see their mom as their mom was happy to see them. She gathered up all the baby things that had been assigned to Vanessa at the prison, picked up the girls, and left there, hoping sincerely that it was for good. Oliver waited for them by the car, not hiding his impatience. My God, who do we have here? Look at the cuties. While he was getting to know his granddaughters, Vanessa looked at them with undisguised happiness. Now she had a family again. In this world, a father who gave them shelter and 3 daughters. What's your hurry, Mom? Asked a cheerful female voice from behind. Or did she turn sharply? Emily? Ella shouted, unable to believe her happiness. They let you out. But how? So sardonically, laughing, replied the parole officer friend, of course. How else my lawyer helped? And what secrets did you have for me? Vanessa said thoughtfully, already hugging her friend. Where are you going now? Emily winked cheerfully. Stay out of adult things. Honey, you'd better introduce me to your father. So they drove into town together. All the way they chatted and laughed, told each other the latest news, and the time on the road flew by. When Vanessa said goodbye, she left Emily her new address and made her promise to come visit her. Days passed and Vanessa began to feel a taste for life again. Together with her daughters, they finally moved in with their father and grandfather, and Oliver gave them the entire second floor. He also bought cribs for his granddaughters, the necessary clothes, and provided them with food and anything else they needed. Oliver had his own small grocery store in town. Therefore, the man had a lot of free time. He spent all his weekends and free time with his granddaughters. This freed his mother from some of the routine worries. Vanessa tried to recover little by little and start her life from scratch. She raised the children, took care of the household, and often helped her father in his business, filling in from time to time for the sales girls working at Oliver's. Life went on as usual, but memories of her prison job kept Vanessa busy. Apparently, she was the only one of the inmates who really enjoyed the monotonous job. So Vanessa had a new idea. She decided that she should train professionally and become a professional seamstress, maybe even a fashion designer. She already had experience, desire, and talent. Even those rough things that Vanessa sewed when she was still in the colony came out of her excellent quality the day she decided to turn her dream into reality. She signed up for an interview at the nearest sewing house. But here another cruel disappointment awaited the young woman because of her criminal record. She was not willing to accept even such an unskilled job, or she tried not to give up. But again and again, she expected another refusal. No one wanted to get in touch with a former offender and did not try by all means. She did not want to give up her favorite business half-heartedly. But unfortunately, all attempts were in vain. She never managed to find a job. One night, after receiving another rejection, the sad Vanessa returned home. "How are you?" asked the girl's father, distracted by playing with the girls. "Did you get caught?" "No," in a heartbeat, she replied, biting her lip, or herself ashamed that she had to serve time in prison, mostly for nothing. Bitter resentment pounced on her with renewed vigor. "No one will accept me. No one wants me," he shouted. "I don't judge them. I mean, really, who needs it? Honey, don't worry. If they don't take you in one place, they're sure to take you in another." The man got up and handed little Helen to his daughter. "It's not worth your while to cry. Daddy, I'm not going anywhere. Just accept it. Everyone thinks I'm a criminal. How much do I hate all this? It's not my fault. Of course it isn't. The important thing is that you know that. Don't worry about it. There's enough money for everyone." She has a big smile on her face. That's how she encourages her daughter. "And you didn't think you could work by yourself? I'll buy you a machine, fabric, thread, everything you need, and you can sew at home. And then we'll display the finished garments in my store." "Dad, you have a grocery store. And an industrial machine costs a lot of money. Forget it." "I'll go wherever they take me," Vanessa replied with nostalgia in her voice. At the same time, the girls were placed at the feeding tables. "And?" Vanessa asked the man sincerely. "We are in the countryside, especially now that it's winter. Well, at least start with warm socks. And you know how to knit too. Let's see how the sales go." She had one lying around, so she rummaged in the nearest closet. "Oh, look. Why don't you at least try? There's no charge for asking." "As they say, I don't know," Vanessa replied quietly. It was a dream come true for her to sell her own handmade and knitted items. "But to start now or embarrass me, Dad, you know, I'm offended by something else. I really didn't steal that pendant. Why doesn't anyone believe me?" "I believe you," Dad replied confidently and was quiet for a long while. Then he wrinkled his nose a little. He asked next, "Don't you want to tell Andres that he is going to have children?" Vanessa opened her eyes wide in surprise. "Andrew?" "No," the girl replied in a harsh tone. "He's not worthy of his own children." "Well, honey, he's their biological father. Maybe he should at least know." Do you think the girl's friends wouldn't want to keep in touch with their own father? Vanessa thought deeply. She immediately thought back to her childhood. The times when she missed her father, those days when she watched with envy as the other children at school and their parents were picked up. And her father, she thought then, had disowned her. The memories stung painfully. She definitely wouldn't want that for her daughters. Thinking, she replied, "I don't know, Dad. Maybe you're right." "Of course I'm right." "I'm sure you are," he replied. "For now, do what you want, but remember that sooner or later you will have to meet Andres. Tell him about the girls. Talk to him. Ask him why he did it." Vanessa and her father were already finishing feeding their daughters when the children, as well as Oliver, had already gone to bed or quietly went to the living room and sat down. In front of the fireplace, she began to knit her first woolen socks to sell. Sateva woke up in the early morning. Vanessa went out into the yard and stopped to look at the plot. The sun had just risen over the horizon and small snowflakes were falling. They seemed to hang motionless in the air. The surface of the brick house was covered with a light layer of snow, and the roads were again covered with a thick layer of snow. Warming up slightly, Vanessa set about clearing the path. Her father's back had been hurting lately, and he was no longer able to do such hard work. When she put the shovel away and looked around again, suddenly he realized that, for the first time in his life, he actually lived in a village, a very normal little village with wild boars occasionally in the area. Many neighbors were raising cows or shoveling snow or lighting the fireplace. "I lived a most ordinary and simple life, but a very happy and fulfilled one." A warm feeling of gratitude pervaded his whole being. Who knows, had it not been for this incarceration in the colony, would he ever have enjoyed this lifestyle? She would have gone to her father. Disadvantaged by her birth mother, she would have given birth to 3 wonderful babies. I didn't know what to think. Vanessa was so used to hating everyone and everything that she had completely forgotten how important it was to realize the simple happiness that surrounded her. How important it is to appreciate simple, tasty food and clean water every day. To appreciate your family, to appreciate your freedom, after all. It turned out that even from her imprisonment, she was able to derive obvious benefits for herself. Interrupting her musings with a creak, the front door opened and a distressed Oliver Vanessa appeared in the doorway. He called out to his daughter, "What are you doing up so early today?" Ellie smiled broadly and went to answer his father's call. "I want to work more. Also a little today while the girls are asleep. By the way, has anyone bought me the socks and sweater of hope?" she asked and followed her father into the house. "Of course I did," the man replied proudly, putting his hand to his sore back. He made an inviting gesture and headed for the kitchen. A boiling kettle was already whistling. The first day your socks and sweater were sold out. The villagers were asking for more. I even promised a lady in the center of the district that you, Sasha, would make her a dress to order. Really? Wow. Or did you just gleefully splash your hands? If things keep going like this, I'm saving up for a good sewing machine. You'll definitely buy one. Honey, but you should know this. I can give you the money you need, and you can't. Vanessa rudely interrupted her father. I want to earn my own money, you know? Well, all right, all right. The father laughed heartily and placed a steaming cup of fragrant tea in front of his daughter. He squared his back and sat down opposite Vanessa, looking into her eyes. What have you decided about Andrew? Ely took a big sip and raised his eyebrows questioningly. What do you mean? What are you going to tell him about the kids? The father asked his question directly. She raised her eyes to the ceiling, dreamy. Lately, Vanessa hadn't realized how she felt about her ex-husband. During the long months she had spent in the colony, she had been so angry, so furious, that she often couldn't contain herself. But what about love? Even in prison, Vanessa clearly understood that behind the anger there were still warm feelings. Behind all that rage and hatred was a small, abandoned, hurt Vanessa. She probably never got to let go of her lover once and for all. After leaving the colony and after Vanessa saw Andrew's car in traffic, she ended up confusing her emotions. On the one hand, she hated him with all her soul because he had set her up, had tricked her on purpose to put her in jail. And on the other hand, it could not be said that Vanessa, being a reasonable person, still loved him. But sometimes she was visited by strange thoughts. What if he wasn't guilty of anything? It was difficult for the young mother to realize where he was hiding the truth. Did she still love her ex-husband, or did she hate him? Was he the one to blame for that setup, or was he himself a victim of circumstances? And that meeting with Betty. What did she mean when she said not to trust anyone? What was she doing in the reform school, as she used to do? There were far more questions than answers, or, come to think of it, answer to her father's perplexed and bewildered look. Yes, I'm willing to meet him. I want to find out who this anonymous witness was. I want to find out why I was treated that way, Vanessa said quietly. Old man, maybe you can find out why they did this to you. When are you going to visit him soon? Really, I want to visit someone else first, Vanessa said in a mysterious tone. Who else? Betty? I'll find out what she was doing in juvie and find out who the man was who set me up. Vanessa stared at the passing building. Holding tightly to the pores of the bus, she couldn't believe that soon she would be able to find out everything. Find out the reason for his imprisonment, find out his motives. She wasn't entirely sure she would meet Betty. She would make it. Her heart pounded in anticipation of the encounter. Thoughts swirled chaotically in her head. Her mind kept throwing out different scenarios. But Vanessa tried with all her might to keep herself under control. Finally, the doors opened and she got off at the stop she needed. She looked around. The neighborhood where her ex-husband had grown up and where Betty lived hadn't changed a bit. She took a deep breath and headed toward the house she was looking for. And with every step, her pulse quickened and her hands shook harder. What will I do if he's not home? She asked herself the same question. The day Vanessa and her mother-in-law had accidentally crossed paths on the bus. Betty got off at a completely different location. What if she no longer lived here? Vanessa walked up to the entrance from memory, dialed the intercom code. The door dropped and the girl climbed the stairs. Reaching the floor she wanted or wasn't sure, she pressed the buzzer. To her surprise, the door opened instantly and a haggard, tired woman appeared on the threshold. "Vanessa, what are you doing here, making no secret of your surprise?" She asked. "What have you come for?" "To find out the truth," announced Vanessa. "Why did you want my trial?" "What have I done to upset you so?" whispered Betty discontentedly. She took a quick glance up the stairwell. Then she grabbed Vanessa by the arm and pulled her back. She quickly closed the door to the apartment. "Quiet you. Why are you shouting all the way down the hall?" The woman was indignant. "Why? Are you afraid that someone will find out that you have set up your daughter-in-law? Explain immediately." The girl continued to insist. "Oh, Vanessa, don't you understand, Betty?" Frustrated, she shook her head. "Let's go to the kitchen." As the women walked to the back of the floor and sat down at the table, Andrew's mother took a long time to decide to start this conversation. She wrung her hands. The old woman's gaze kept wandering. She couldn't gather her strength and look her in the eye either. Finally, he exhaled deeply. She exhaled the first words out of Vanessa's mouth. "Believe me, it's not what it looks like. At first glance, it is much more complicated than that." The woman turned away guiltily, looking out the window with her wandering gaze. "I understand that you want to know why our family has treated you this way, but I won't be able to give you an answer. Not even with my eyes wide open. What does that mean?" A blue crown protruded from her forehead, indignant. "You realize what I've been through, don't you? I've been in jail for nothing, and it's hard for you to give me a reason. I thought you and I had always had a good relationship. Have you?" No, 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 no. Betty yelled at me. "I've always treated you well, and I'm treating you right now. There was no other way." "Oh my God." Vanessa jumped to her feet. "Stop talking in riddles. Why did you testify against me? Why did you set me up?" "Do I know what you mean?" the woman replied. "But I didn't give that testimony. It certainly wasn't me. Then who was it? Or did you approach your mother-in-law?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "Tell me, who is this anonymous witness?" "I can't tell you. I can't tell you." She turned away again, as if afraid to cross an enraged Vanessa and her gaze. "Just know that it wasn't me. I tried to help you, but circumstances got the better of me." "Then who was who? Andrew?" "It was him." "No, darling, of course it wasn't." "I know you won't believe me, but Andrew never meant to hurt you. He always loved you." Vanessa laughed nervously. "Come on. When love goes to jail, you don't get custody. That's just the way it is. But believe me, Andrew had nothing to do with it either." At last, she looked Vanessa closely in the eye. "Remember what I told you. Think who you trust. That's all I can say." Elle closed her eyes, trying not to burst out screaming again. "All right, what were you doing at the women's colony? At least answer that." Betty thought long and hard before saying anything, tapping her fingers nervously on the table, frowning. "Okay, I'll answer," said the woman quietly. "I, like you, have been condemned. Only I, unlike you, have been allowed to stay at home under house arrest, but my movements are restricted. In addition, I have been assigned community service. There is a departmental factory not far from the colony. That is where I am forced to work. Fate has not only treated you badly, but also you. Why? Or did you just close your eyes in surprise? What have you done? That's just it. Honey, I'm not regretting anything. You and I got into a terrible mess. You got away with it. That's why I don't want to answer you. I don't want you to get involved in this again. In a situation like this, not knowing is the best thing to do. Yes, you had to spend time in prison, but now you're free. Forget about it all. Move on with your life." That's easy to say. Celia resented it. "My life is ruined. I can't get a job because of my criminal record. My mother kicked me out of the house, and my kids are kids." "What kids?" Betty asked in surprise. "And wait, Mom, your mother kicked you out of the house? Where do you live?" Vanessa looked intently at her former mother-in-law and suddenly felt like getting even. She waved her hand. I'm not going to tell you anything. It's up to you. You haven't answered my questions, and I won't answer yours or Betty's. Wasn't it 6 months after you gave birth that you got out of prison? Did you give birth in prison? My God, did I become a grandmother? Betty's eyes lit up with happiness. Her lips stretched into a smile. Why didn't you say so from the beginning? I have a grandson or granddaughter, Betty. Granddaughter. I had triplets. Vanessa replied calmly. She was slightly embarrassed by her earlier behavior and went back to sitting at the kitchen table. Yes, my mother threw me out and kicked me out of the apartment. I reconciled with my father and now my daughters, and I live with him. Why were you surprised when I said Mom? Were you embarrassed? No, not at all. Forgetting that he cleared his granddaughter's throat means 3 times as much. How many things have you been through? When I can know them, when you can give me answers to my questions, Vanessa replied casually, rising from her seat. She left the apartment without waiting for her ex-mother-in-law's answer. She ran out of the house in a hurry. She didn't want to be there a second longer, nor did she know what to think. Once again, she had even more questions. What was Betty talking about? Why was she being judged? What was she hiding? Was Andrew really not to blame? Not wanting to think about what had happened anymore, Vanessa got on the bus and headed to the bus station to catch one to take her to her neighborhood. As it turned out, she was no closer to solving the mystery. But I don't know, Oliver said thoughtfully. I don't think she's lying. Then why isn't she telling the truth, Dad, if she has nothing to hide? Vanessa asked her father. That evening, when the girls were tucked up in their crib, Oliver and Vanessa sat together in the living room. In front of the fireplace, Vanessa was knitting a warm sweater for one of her daughters, while her father was arming himself with the right tools and fixing a broken clock. He replied to his daughter, Sometimes circumstances are stronger, don't I know that? What's going on out there? I don't understand. If Andrew's not to blame, is Kelly the one keeping everyone in fear? It's absurd. It's not absurd. Do you know how twisted people can be? Look at your mother. You'll say the same thing, or a grudging chuckle. What's she got to do with it? It's not like she's intimidated. Grandma, do you really think Betty's afraid of Kelly? Honey, I don't think anything. I'm just guessing. We'll never know. Yeah, I think you should listen to this woman. Payback never did anyone any good. Dad resented Vanessa. They ruined my whole life. How can I forget that and get on with my life? I want to find out who did this. All right. It's up to you, Oliver replied calmly and deflected the subject in another direction. So you went to see Andrew. He already knows he's a father. No, I didn't. And Betty turned away the spokes and cocked her head to one side. Talking to Betty, you made me go to his house too. Seeing the look of satisfaction on that bitch Alina's face, I didn't want that. And I think her mother will tell her herself. And if they're not in touch anymore, then what? No, you have to tell her. And Kelly is, well, what can you do? Don't worry about her for a second. She's not worth it. How come they don't communicate? Vanessa was shocked. She was so protective of him, so dismissive, screaming that it wasn't her fault he had a deadline. Do you think she would have defended him if they weren't in contact? I think they're doing well. You can't know for sure. You have to go and see for yourself. Talk to Andrew and let the situation go. That's what Vasilisa said. Live your life, Oliver urged his daughter. Vanessa wondered if it was Andrew who was keeping her mother in fear. Is that why she was talking about him like that? What if Andrew is the anonymous witness? It could be anything. Betty, go see him now and talk to him from the waist up. That said, Vanessa resumed her knitting. The rest of the afternoon passed quietly. The family did not return to this conversation. With quiet, uncertain steps, spring was approaching, the snowdrifts were melting, leaving giant puddles, and all of nature was preparing to wake up, and Vanessa's work did not stop. In just a few months, she had built up a whole portfolio of customers. Orders poured into the craftswoman's hands like springtime streams. Life was improving little by little. Vanessa's daughters were growing up and making her and their grandfather happy. Oliver worked in his store. Vanessa herself was gradually recovering. She worked for her own pleasure and raised her daughters with passion. You could say that Vanessa's life was almost perfect if it weren't for one small detail. She could not forget what had happened to her. Literally every night Vanessa didn't sleep for a long time, all the while dribbling and thinking about how unfairly she had been treated. And who was to blame? It turned out that Vanessa couldn't take Betty Michaelovna's advice, and once again decided to find out what was keeping her awake at night. She pulled herself together and left her children in the company of their loving grandfather. A return to the city with the purpose of seeing Andrew. She drove to the house where she had lived for those years. As soon as Andrew turned 18, his parents bought him a separate apartment, and he, of course, immediately invited his girlfriend to live with him. The young people lived together, and if someone had told them, then how would be their future life? To remember the past, to believe in all the recent events was unbearably difficult, even impossible. Approaching the house, Vanessa raised her head, squinting against the bright sun. She quickly found the balcony of Andrew's apartment, and nostalgia returned to her with renewed vigor. She remembered how, when she had moved in with her fiancé, she had started a greenhouse on her balcony, how she had gone across town to buy another flower. Now the balcony was empty, and now she lived there with annoyance, Vanessa observed to herself. She couldn't get it through her head. Why had Andrew abandoned her so easily? How could he have left the one he had once loved more than life? Why had he changed her for another in an instant? Vanessa made her way to the entrance and, without thinking, rang the doorbell. After her conversation with Betty, she didn't know what to expect. Andrew opened the door. "Hello," stunned she looked at Vanessa. She said hello. Finally seeing Andrew after a long pause, Vanessa immediately realized something was wrong with him. Panic in her eyes. It looked like he was the one being held prisoner and not Vanessa. She lifted her chin proudly. "Why?" he asked instead of waving. "If you fell out of love with me, why didn't you leave me? Why did you have to ruin my whole life like that?" Andrew lowered his eyes. "Vanessa, you shouldn't have come here. Why should I?" The girl was outraged. "What secrets do you and your mother have? How many times? At least explain everything. Have a conscience, after all." Andrew raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Have you seen your mother? How is she? What's wrong with her now?" He turned around, peering down at the floor, and took a step forward, stepping out into the hallway. "What has she told you?" he asked, lowering his voice. "No, answers first. Or did she point the finger at her ex-husband? I'm sick of all this. I just want to know why I've been treated like this." "Andrew," he scratched his ear uncertainly. "You'll find out, I promise. Just give me some time." "Time for what? What do you need time for? What's going on here?" Vanessa almost shouted. "Why did you testify against me?" "I didn't," Andrew shouted, and immediately embarrassed by his own emotionality. "And believe me, your incarceration was the only way out for us. Do you even know what you're talking about? Have you ever been to juvie? Do you think it's paradise? No, I haven't. I was faced with such a choice that your incarceration was the lesser of evils." "Those people." "What people?" Vanessa interrupted. "Who are you talking about? Those people could have done much worse things to you. I still don't know who sent them, but it's very dangerous to mess with them." Andrew, like a frightened child, turned at every noise. His voice was calm. It was evident that he was very frightened. He lowered his voice. "You shouldn't be here. Go away, please go away, I'll get back to you later." When the sharp sound of the door opening prevented the man from finishing that sentence, Kelly appeared in the doorway. "What people?" she said in an unpleasant voice. "What are you doing here?" Vanessa took a menacing step forward, looking sternly into her former friend's eyes. Vanessa was no longer the shy girl who had cursed at every loud word a couple of years ago. Prison had taught Vanessa. Life had taught her not to be afraid to look her enemies straight in the eye. Seeing her former friend's confident gaze, Kelly visibly stiffened, but tried not to show it. She rephrased her question, "Why did you come here?" To look you in the eye, Vanessa said plainly, "Why did you do this to me?" That you were afraid Andrew wouldn't last long. "If I'm still free," Kelly seethed, losing her self-control. "How dare you?" she screamed. "Andrew was never yours." The ex-husband, who had been standing beside her the whole time, shot a meaningful glance at Vanessa, and turned to Kelly. "Don't be nervous. Shall we go inside?" "No," snapped an already enraged Kelly and hurled, "Vanessa, you're a dirty thief. You got what you deserve. Thieves should be in jail. It's not your pendant, it's Andrew's family pendant. You had nothing to do with it. You just slandered me. And you were my best friend. Do you know how they treat people like you in juvie? Or did you just squint? Is Kelly getting nervous? I don't know and I don't want to know. That's the kind of knowledge I'll never need." "We'll see about that," Vanessa replied firmly and turned and walked away. On the way home, Vanessa couldn't stop thinking about Andrew's words. What kind of people he was talking about and why he had stopped communicating with her mother. And about Alina's strange behavior. All nervous and jittery. What could be going on, the girl thought. Andrew said that jail was the lesser of evils. What could be worse than jail? She thought deeply about that question. By the time she was walking home, the hair on the back of her head seemed to stand on end. His blood froze in his veins and his heart skipped a beat. He seemed to realize what Andrew meant. What could be worse than prison? Death. The girl walked the rest of the way, glancing nervously around. Betty was right. She shouldn't have gone in there. A cold, clammy sweat ran down her back with her eyes closed in fear. He had never told her about the children, had he? Vanessa was completely confused by all the recent events. She burst into the house like she was being chased by dogs, bolted the gate, and ran into the foyer, ripping off her shoes and jacket. Dad called Oliver and hurried into the living room and then into the kitchen. Vanessa froze in surprise. Her father, smiling cordially, was sitting in the company of a portly, red-haired woman. Emily shouted to Vanessa and was instantly in her friend's arms. "Good to see you. I've been waiting for you. Hi." It was obvious that Emily was glad to see you too. "How was your trip?" Vanessa sighed nervously. "Dad told you everything." "Yes, you don't have to tell me the latest news." Emily smiled softly. "Yes, I'm already in the loop, not Tommy. What did Andrew say?" Vanessa sank back. The look Dad actually gave didn't say anything. She briefly recounted today's events to Emily and Dad. And they both collapsed into the arms of the old couch. As always, more questions arose. Who were these dangerous people? Why was jail the lesser of evils? I don't understand anything at all. Who was the anonymous witness? The moment Vanessa mentioned the mystery witness, Emily and her father's faces visibly changed. Emily and her father's faces visibly changed, or asked in surprise, "What's wrong? What's wrong with you?" She looked worriedly from her father to her friend Vanessa. Emily got up from the table and approached the girl, taking her hand. "I came to see you for a reason. I learned something, that or looked interested." "What are you talking about?" "Remember when we were in juvie and I promised to help you with your case?" Emily asked. "Of course I remember. Tell me what you found out. Isn't it intriguing?" "Don't ask me how, but I was able to get into the files and found out who that anonymous witness was. I know who gave that testimony that got you thrown in jail." Emily exhaled heavily, not breaking eye contact with her friend, or burning with curiosity. Who is he? Who? Talking. And already she gripped the woman's arm tightly. Or was it her mother? How? Or was her whole life flashing before her eyes? He knew his mother was far from being a gift, and what his father had told him didn't fit the image of the perfect mother. But to send her own son to prison knowing it wasn't her fault. Vanessa couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. Maria was the witness. It was she who told in color how she saw you hide and steal the toilet, the pendant. "I'm sorry, I really don't know how to support you." Emily went down to the palace, holding her hands tightly. "I can't imagine how anyone could do that to their own daughter." "I can't either." Vanessa spoke softly. She looked at Oliver. "Dad, did you know?" "I just found out now from Emily," the man replied. "I'm shocked too. I knew Maria would frame anyone but you. I don't know what to think. Why would he do that?" Thoughtfully, as if to himself, asked the older man. "I don't know," Vanessa replied quietly. "But I will find out. This cannot go unpunished. He must answer for it." With these words, Vanessa got up and ran out of the kitchen. She went upstairs to her daughter's room. How can this be? thought Vanessa, and immediately analyzed the situation with herself. Could she have incriminated her daughter? Never and never in her life. Whether after the father's story or definitely changed her opinion about her mother. But still she tried to understand her. But now Vanessa realized that she now refused to relate to her. She had finally figured out who was involved in the setup. She had figured it out and was ready to get revenge. The next day, Vanessa traveled to the city. She was overcome with anger, for the pain of her own mother's betrayal was unrelenting. Once again, she went to confront the relationship. True, she now had some information at her disposal. After reflecting on previous dialogues, Vanessa decided to prepare herself thoroughly. After consulting with her father and Emily, who was staying with them for a few days, Vanessa went to her mother's house for a reason. This time she had an ace up her sleeve. Once all the equipment was checked and a couple of important calls were made, Vanessa entered the house with a confident stride. She went upstairs and immediately drummed on the front door. "Open up," she shouted, sure that her mother was already home. "I know you're here." Oh, spared no effort. She knocked as if her life depended on the force of those knocks. Until a few hours ago, thanks to Emily's programmer, the women had managed to find out that Maria had returned to the apartment in the early hours of the morning. She had not left the house again, so there was no doubt. The traitor. I heard a knock at the door. After a few long minutes, the door opened ajar and Maria peeked through the crack, her face covered in sweat. "Why are you sad?" He poked me. "Stop embarrassing me in front of the neighbors." Or he did. Now was not the time to be ceremonious. When the door opened, he quickly stuck his foot in. Her huge, sturdy shoes prevented her mother from slamming the door shut, and Vanessa was able to force her way in. The frightened mother backed up a couple of steps. "Is this how prison changes people? You go crazy. You throw yourself at your own mother." "Now you remember me?" "Yes," Vanessa asked with a smirk. She had taken a quick look around. The apartment had been beautifully renovated. Marble paneling, luxurious period furniture had just broken her eyes. Oh, asked where the money had come from. "Mom, did you really get such a bargain for framing your own daughter?" Maria was stunned. "How do you talk to your mother?" She shouted. "Get out of here or I'll call the police again." Oh stepped forward. "Are you my mother?" In a low, threatening voice, she said. "It's not you, and I reject you. I know everything. Just tell me why you wanted to do this. And what do you know?" Maria snorted. There was no trace of the recent fear left. "Well, I didn't expect you to guess, did I? I've always had you. Answer me, why? Why did you do it? Or did you take it a step further with your mother? Why? Why? Why?" I repeated after my daughter. "Because you were of no use to her." Her eyes flashed with madness. "Who did you marry?" "Your father, I suppose." "You wouldn't have agreed to steal that pendant, would you?" "Neither would I. So I had to get rid of you, I'm sorry. So you admit you set me up." "I admit to perjury," Vanessa asked, raising her voice. "Oh, this is a dead end." The woman laughed. "Of course it is. You're nothing but trouble. That's Kelly. I wish she was my daughter. I saw potential in her when she was a kid. She'd do anything to get what she wanted. It's not like you're a wimp. Did you put me in jail for some dangling and put Kelly up to it? Or did you wonder again, even though you vowed not to wonder about anything anymore? What kind of people put you up to it? Was it Andrew's mother? It was you. Who else?" "Of course it was me," I laughed with renewed vigor. "When you and Kelly were very young, thanks to Kelly herself, I made a useful friendship. Her uncle was out of jail at the time. He was very famous in the world of thieves. He had his eye on me right away and introduced me to his rooftops. I always knew the good life wasn't for me, and your boring father was always boring. Then I heard about the pendant, which was legendary among thieves. We knew it belonged to some family in our village, but we didn't know to whom. I divorced your father, and I started dating my Zach." The woman smiled almost sweetly. "He is an incredibly interesting man. He has such a dangerous and interesting life with all of them." Maria told it all with undisguised pride. Vanessa felt chills. She couldn't believe that this strange foreign woman was her own mother. Vanessa asked softly, "So you contacted the criminals and instigated them to steal the pendant?" But why didn't you get rid of me before you let me live with my father? What a fool you are, she shook her head. Your father paid good alimony. With that money, I helped my man Zach get back on his feet when he needed it. And then you managed to do some good yourself. Don't look so surprised. You grew up and fell in love with that Andrew Tonto of yours. I still remember you dreaming about a mysterious pendant you passed around. What was my surprise when I realized it was that very jewel? Since you were 16, we have been preparing for this case. Stealing her would have been a real mistake. It was too notorious, so we had to play it safe. How? Did you get Kelly to seduce Andrew? Did Vanessa feel like she was going to puke with disgust? No, Kelly was up to her neck without my help. The crazy lady let out a disgusted giggle. Because of her coming of age, I made a deal with her. I help her get rid of you, and she seduces Andrew and keeps the pendant. We split the money, and it's all about the money. How is that possible? Vanessa said quietly. Of course it is. Do you have any idea how much this thing is worth? Zach's goons intimidated Betty and Andrew. She fought back hard enough to defend you in court, but Andrew had to be shut down too. He was given a choice between you going to jail or having a terrible car accident. Of course, he agreed to stay out of it to keep you alive. That idiot loves you. I don't know why, really. Andrew cheated on me at my wedding. He kissed Kelly. What kind of love is that? Bitter. Vanessa smiled. I don't think you can fake that. Maria laughed wickedly. One can know all the right methods. They must have slipped something into him. That's why the guy lost his mind. And forcing him to marry the line wasn't hard. The threat of death of loved ones can accomplish a lot. Maria said mockingly, and immediately threw her daughter a suspicious look. Who knew you'd be paroled? So soon, Ub. You were always a guy. You got 6 years. That should have been enough time for us to finish all our old business here and go overseas. And here you are, hello, surprise. Why can't you stay in one place? What are you doing? Where don't you belong? You said Andrew threatened to kill me, said Vanessa in a low, changed voice. If I had refused your terms anyway, would you really have killed me? Maria smiled predatorily and looked at her daughter with completely crazed, glassy eyes. Why did he hesitate? He took a quick step into the kitchen and returned holding a large kitchen knife. I told you to stay out of it. I didn't pretend not to remember you. Why did you choose your own destiny? With those words, the woman began to slowly move forward, glowering predatorily and with knife at the ready. It was all happening like a nightmare. Vanessa felt that a little more and she would simply faint from terror, but still she gathered her strength and screamed at the top of her lungs. Now she had the knife. That Mary jumped to her feet, looking around. At the same instant, the door to the apartment opened and O&O agents rushed in. They placed the witch with the knife face down on the marble floor so that she would not move. Are you under arrest? Shouted one of the agents. Finally, we have a lead on this OCG. Shortly after, the police officers Vanessa already knew entered the room. One of them was the cop who didn't leave the poor girl in trouble. And with him, Police Captain Benjamin. In person. Or did she smile gratefully at the men? Thank you for believing me, she said. Thank you, the captain replied. You've helped us find dangerous criminals we haven't been able to catch for years. You deserve all the respect you can get. And about the wrongful conviction, we will provide you with a lawyer, the case will be reconsidered, the conviction will be dismissed, and the state will compensate you for moral damages. An officer from the police station interrupted the conversation. When I came here for a call, I immediately realized that something was wrong. It's good that you called me Vanessa. People like her should be behind bars. That's for sure, Vanessa summed up. Before going to her mother's house, she had a long consultation with Emily. She had suggested the excellent option of contacting a policeman she knew. Either that or exchange phone numbers with him and offer him a deal. Vanessa arrived at the police station and in her concealed clothing, a listening device. She deliberately turned to her mother with the intention of getting as much information out of her as possible. And it was no coincidence that he asked Maria so many questions. At that point, the police department listened to the entire conversation and recorded it for evidence in court. Thus, Maria was looking at a very good conviction, framing not only herself, but also Kelly and her criminal uncle. Betty finally discovered the truth. "I hope we can get to the rest of the OCG," Vanessa said. "The mobsters should be in jail." "We'll do what we can," Captain Benjamin told her. "Don't worry." Maria's case turned out to be so high profile that it was the talk of the town for several more months. The police had managed to track down the entire criminal gang he was talking about, and each of its members got what they deserved. Maria herself, as well as Kelly and her uncle Zach, received solid sentences. It turned out that on their account, not only this crime, but something worse. The court passed sentence. Vanessa acknowledged her mistake and was paid a large sum for moral damages. With the money received, she was able to fulfill his dream, took out a loan, bought a plot of land on the outskirts of the city, built on it a building, and opened her sewing house. In a few years, her business grew with branches, and she became a famous fashion designer. Now the whole city wore Vanessa's clothes. That's how she named her salon. This whole story taught Vanessa not to judge a person by their past. After all, as practice shows, an ex-convict can be much more human than a good housewife. Vanessa herself was always happy to employ women who had left the colony. She paid no attention to their past, but gave them all a new chance to find themselves in this life. A few months after her mother's arrest, Vanessa reconciled with Andrew. It turned out that her intuition did not fail her, and the ex-husband turned out to be completely blameless. When Andrew found out about his daughters, he was happier than ever. Our dreams had come true. She screamed with joy, throwing up one after another, the little ones emitting with delight. Vanessa and the children moved into Andrew's apartment. There he took up his old hobby again on the spacious balcony and set up a real greenhouse. Oliver's life didn't stop either. He was so attracted to the kind, intelligent, and decent Emily that he began to court her. After a few months, the woman surrendered to the mercy of the victor. Thus, a new happy couple was formed. Having got rid of Maria, the whole family breathed a sigh of relief, and Betty could once again have a child and a normal life. After all, both Maria and Betty had been charged as accomplices in the robbery, and Vanessa no longer held a grudge against anyone. She became more understanding and tolerant, no matter how unfair her life had been at first. But in the end, she put everything and everyone in their rightful place.
Subscribe and click the bell. Even in her dream, a sense of joyful excitement had started to dawn on her. She was dreaming of her husband. John pressed her to him, and it made the girl feel insanely good. So she opened her eyes and slid through the apartment still at dawn. The sun's rays drew on the wallpaper an intricate pattern. She threw back the sheet, allowing it to continue traveling over her naked body. Slyera sat up on the bed and stretched. The sweet theme had finally developed. The illuminating morning chill presented itself. Slyera got up, walked to the bathroom, and turned on the cool shower. She had practiced this for several years now. Hot water used to make it hard to concentrate, take away energy. But this way, it was like a second breath. You come out fresh and full of energy, immediately ready to engage in the day's hustle and bustle. Ahead of her awaits a new day, and in the evening a restaurant or. The girl grinned dinner with her son, and hers too, though adopted. But it was she who had been by his side for 2 years, going to parent-teacher conferences, listening to his revelations about his relationships with friends and teachers. Did she feel like a mom? She was only 3 years older. No, she didn't want to be. Her husband just wanted to give the guy the illusion of marital happiness, so she went along with the game. He got lucky with her. He was 38 when they met. His first wife, Jacob's mother, passed away when he was only 4 years old. The guy often told Clara that he does not even remember what she looked like. The boy was raised by his grandmother, Marlo, on his mother. She was physically weak, and every year her health was deteriorating. It was enough only for the most basic care of food and clothes for the child. Therefore, Slaga, in the person of Jacob, got a Terry triplets, which in addition was in the midst of puberty. No one could find a common language with the teenager. Complaints came from teachers and neighbors, and with his stepmother he became friends only years later when he turned into an angry, handsome young man. How she managed it, no one knew, but she was the only one he seemed to obey in public, and John was never able to win his son's trust. And did he want to? He went from one term to the next, and when he came back, he was in the pubs. It was a way of life that finally got to his mother. She died, leaving her negligent son a big house in the center of town. That's where John brought his new wife. At first, Jacob met her in the bayonet. He reminded the girl of the shield in her stomach, of his former self from his pack, the lonely, hungry, angry one. Clara was defiant and implacable with him as well. She was always the leader and considered herself the mistress of the house. That's why she went straight to the bottle in any dispute. Young, sensual, and passionate, she wanted to live only by her own rules and had no pity for the boy. He was in the way. She didn't need him at all. They disliked each other intensely, fought so much that they seemed to fight. She was very much in love with John at the time. She knew of his criminal record and knew he'd never put a stop to it. But the man was as handsome as God, and he was charming and generous. Strong, tall, with big, bright green eyes, a strong-willed chin, a dazzling and snow-white smile. A dandy. Dressed well-groomed. He liked to look after himself in the wild. He played sports, went to the tanning salon. He had enough money for metal ceramics, expensive clothes, restaurants, and women. Clara fell in love with him at first sight. As soon as she saw him in one of the popular night spots in the city, he too could not remain indifferent to the young Smuglianka. Many people paid attention to her. Seeing her once in a restaurant, the man felt that this time before him is an interesting woman, and she will not be an easy prey. Flexible in an open, short, olive-colored dress, she walked confidently down the hall. She moved easily, smoothly, even though she was wearing high-heeled shoes, carelessly fixing her heavy, deep chocolate-colored hair, smooth as silk, with a look of big eyes snatched in the crowd of men worthy of his attention. Daring, risky, daring such, and did not meet on the way John Marlowe. Seeing her, he immediately began the hunt. He himself came to the table where she sat with her friends and glared at her with his eyes. He put an expensive bottle of champagne in the middle. My treat. Trial of strength, he with his low pro-chicken voice, will not be enough, will order more. What's that for? That proudly threw her head down. Clara, we're sitting pretty good. I see you're sitting even better. The man turned around and went to his table. Sophia admired Slaga's friend Sophia. Chill. She gave him a piercing glare. I could smell him a mile away. That cat. Hogarth, yeah, you take after, Sophia giggled. I felt it too. Only you won't, because I won't. At the height of the evening, John and Clara joined together on the dance floor. They were irresistibly attracted to each other. Marlowe could only wonder that his new acquaintance was so confident, so young, and so bright. Her intelligence and grace could be envied by mature women whom John valued so much. At the end of the evening, he was enchanted by the girl. He was afraid to admit to himself that she had hit him right in the heart. The daring, swarthy girl was unlike the ladies he had met before. She was interesting. Among the many charming, intelligent, and beautiful women, she stood out. An inexplicable thrill arose in the soul of the man. He wanted to drown in his relationship with her. John caught himself thinking that all his previous romances were boring. Unremarkable meetings with a slight tinge of sympathy. How many of them had been so evocative of his quiet interest? Dozens, hundreds. In general, John moved only one desire to satisfy sexual hunger and replenish his male collection. By and large, they were ladies for a night, for a week, at best for a month. But Slaga, she attracted her sensuality, her passion, and at the same time was in the border boyfriend. With her you could get drunk, talk frankly, and even get mind-blowing quality sex. I didn't want to part with her. She was looking for strength, such inner confidence that involuntarily there was a desire to obey, trust, give into the hands of this goddess all the reins of love and enjoy. John had seen other beauties like her, but they didn't have the charms that Clara had. He wanted her all the time. Every movement of her gaze was like a volcano of desire, an unparalleled rare trait. He was amazed to find himself admiring her swift gait, the radiant smile, the way she gestured. John realized that an early unexplored feeling had stirred in the back of his mind. It was an attraction. The condition was unusual for him. He was bathed in the cocktail, the excitement, the involvement. He couldn't understand what it was about this girl that attracted him. It was something elusive. He didn't feel a shadow of embarrassment in her presence. He had every fantasy with her. Next to Clara, he was physically aroused, uninhibited and bold. He did not immediately realize that it was his woman. At first he just went to the light, flew to the young girl like a moth. Only later he noticed that he never got bored near her, never thought about business or about someone else. She absorbed all his attention, and she ridiculously came to him with stupid talk about love or pathetic sentimental feelings. Next to her one could be any debauchery, drunken, schoolboyish. John realized that in front of him was a strong personality, and whatever their relationship in the future, he would not be able to possess her completely. The girl would always have her own world hidden from him. Only at will she will open the door to him, but will not let him in completely. "Let's get married." He proposed to her a week after we met. "So serious," she laughed. "Yeah, I think we're right for each other. Or maybe I'm wrong," he asked. "No, it looked like it." Clara nodded and made her way to his lips. John felt himself getting turned on. "I'll be yours." The girl slowly backed away from him. "If you show class tonight." Clara drilled the man with her velvet brown eyes, and John moved to follow her. Such games thrilled him, boosted his male ego, released his instincts. "To my place," he suggested. "Let's go." Clara shook her head, and her luxurious hair spread over her round shoulders. Soon, they were speeding by cab through the night city. Entering the rented apartment, Slaga herself led him to the bedroom. The room was in semi-darkness. She turned on only one night lamp. The girl, without false shame, threw off her dress. There was nothing under it. John followed her example. He looked admiringly at her slender young body, then boldly approached her and embraced her. In intimacy, she belonged completely. He was resourceful, then pitching left, then slipping away, then passionate, then indifferent. Always different, always unpredictable. He enjoyed his woman, her animal, magnetism. A look, not arbitrary body movements, atomic size. Next to her, the whole world was just a backdrop for their love. John married her and brought her into the house as a mistress. The new status was to her liking. She enthusiastically took care of repairs and household problems. Marlowe's son was confronted with the fact of his marriage and told to obey Slaga. The teenager circled the newlyweds with a contemptuous look, glared, and locked himself in his room. For a month, he barely spoke to them one syllable, answering questions and avoiding all contact. In time, he got used to it, but in every way he showed his contempt for his newfound mother. And with his father he was cold. Of course, he had no time for his son. During the day, he disappeared on his business, in the evening in the bedroom with his young wife. But the boy's behavior irritated him. One night, when John was asleep, the girl drank champagne in the kitchen. She heard a key turn in the lock. It was Jacob, returning from a nightclub. He walked into the kitchen and saw Clara sitting in just her panties on the windowsill. "Hey you, we need to talk," she started. "I demand basic respect from you. Why don't you go stripper first?" "Who the hell are you to pay attention to you?" Jacob replied. "I'm kind of your mom. You know, Dad's got a new term coming up. He's not gonna let go of his habits. You didn't have time to draw your father here, and you thought you knew everything about everyone. I don't mean that kind of longing. Father had the sea." At these words, Clara jumped up to the teenager and slapped him. "You say that again, I'll bury you, puppy. You don't realize who you're dealing with." I'm the only one who understood Jacob, at first taken aback, then rubbed the sore spot with his hand and suddenly sharply grabbed Clara by the arms and pinned behind her back, bent her forward. "I'll try to do it again. You're older, but think with your head. Who are you smiling at? I'm taller than you and stronger. I've been fighting for a long time. So get out of here before you get your ass kicked." The guy let the girl go. Wow. A cheeky grin spread across his face. "You're not as easy as you look." She got a kick out of him. "Okay, you surprised me, come to me. Now that you've started, I take my ambition back." Jacob looked at the swarthy, beautiful girl. She was good. The guy decided to use her and tell his father about it. "I'll take you," excitedly, he said. "Take off your clothes." The girl gasped, and he turned on the camera. Jacob approached her and possessed her. In his emerald eyes only hatred shone. Then he left her alone, picked up his things from the floor. He went to his room. He filmed the whole process in his room several times. He watched the video. "So much for the dirt. I'll show my father tomorrow," he decided as he fell asleep. The guy woke up to someone's hands caressing. His body threw back the sheet. He tried to push her away. Yesterday's contact was for fun. Liar. What a wheezing cunt. Jacob grabbed the girl by the neck and threw her on her stomach. "Where is the father?" he asked. When it was over, "Where did he go?" whispered Clara. "What time is it?" 12 o'clock. Through the open window could be heard the car rumble of people's voices, children's laughter. It was a day off and many people were leaving for the dacha. She got up and went to take a shower. She came back half an hour later. "You hear that? Can you stop walking around the house naked?" Jacob turned to her. "You're your father's value, but to me you're one of 1,000. We'll see about that." The girl glared at him. Together, they stayed in his bedroom until deep into the night. Waking up at 0 o'clock, Jacob went into the kitchen. The house was dark. That's odd. His father never came back. He got worried, then went to his room. It was empty. Jacob woke up Clara. "Father is still gone," he told her. The girl reluctantly got out of bed, fumbled with the sheet, and took the phone from the nightstand. Dialed Marlowe's number several times. No answer, she sighed. Strange, he hadn't set foot in a casino in 3 months. He hasn't been hitting on any chicks yet. "I'm on a roll. Come on, get dressed. Let's hit the hot spots." I pulled on a wide sweater and jeans over my naked body. Clara jumped into the driver's seat, pressed the klaxon a few times. "Why are you ringing the whole street?" Jacob approached and got indignant. "Sit down, son." And frowned. Intuition tells me that I need to hurry. The engine roared and the car took off. Drove it just as I loved it. As they say, without brakes. In this case, it was not even in the figurative sense. But we quickly bypassed all the unfortunate places. Marlowe Sr. was nowhere to be seen. There is only one place left. The girl stretched out. And in a couple of minutes they arrived at the police station. Yes, tired nodded the duty officer. Took John on a theft at a jeweler's. You know he's the kind of guy who doesn't stay out long. But Jacob cursed profanely. That's pathological. You're in my hands now. The kid smirked at Syl as promptly as ever. And for me, in general, and on time to go home. Now we'll see him only after the trial and then on big holidays. Marlowe was sentenced to 3 years. He was sent to a high-security colony to serve his sentence. Clara came to see him for a long visit. He was released to a hotel for 24 hours. To her surprise, he first pounced on the food, and then already on her. The girl was standing by the window. He came up behind her and began to caress her neck, collarbones, breasts. The man imperiously turned her to himself, encircled her face with his palms, and completely given over to the power of his feelings, passionately penetrated her mouth. She wrapped her arms around her husband's neck, drawing him to her. Clara felt the pounding of his heart quicken. John covered the girl's body with short, vigorous kisses, freed her from her clothes, picked her up in his arms, and carried her to the bed. Then Clara lay on his shoulder, and he caressed the strands of her lustrous chocolate hair. Why are you cold? Did you find someone else? He asked. Don't talk nonsense, she whispered back. I'm just tired. I'll make up for it. She started kissing his ear, but I recognize my initiative, girl. With you, it's like heaven. He kissed passionately. The girl's flaccid lips. Their dance of love continued until dawn. Marlo was satisfied. John, we're running out of money with Jacob. What do we do? Clara asked him in the morning. Don't worry, sweetheart. Just don't give your soul to anyone but me for it. Won't you need money? I've got plenty in reserve. There's enough for Jacob and the kids. I'll write you a power of attorney, and you can take it with you. Don't deny yourself anything. Spend it on vacations, salons, pubs. But no men. Go everywhere with your son. Sama told me that you two became friends and bonded. Nodded the girl. Hey, you're not sitting with a baby. It's interesting with him. With him, Topalov has the caress of a husband. He did not let her out of bed, but she only dreamed of Jacob. For the first time, the hunter for men's hearts was tired of physical love. Now she longed for the arms of her lover. Being close to him made her slave happy, and she wished to be with Jacob every minute of her life. Meanwhile, her relationship with him was complicated. He slept with his stepmother, but he only looked at her with lust. There was no love in his eyes. He began to tear himself down. She hired tutors for him. The boy's behavior also became more even. He expressed less to those around him, showed patience and loyalty. Perhaps the reason was their sexual games, which drained his energy. He behaved swaggeringly in the bedroom and could brazenly order himself to incarnate into a nurse or a bank director's hotel maid or a school teacher. The guy seemed to enjoy realizing what influence he had over her, and for some reason he wanted to humiliate the girl. Maybe for the fact that she took from him the last favorite person of his father. All of Clara's pride and independence vanished. She was ready to serve her idol every minute, to fulfill any whims, to be a thing for this handsome, strong guy. She was afraid that one day he would leave her, love her for real, and forget about her. Clara realized that she also had a certain power over the guy, over his body, but she never got hold of the young man's soul, no matter how hard she tried. When she returned home from the colony from her husband's house, there was a surprise waiting for her. Jacob put her things in a bag and put her out the door. The girl's heart almost stopped. She beat helplessly at the door with her fists, but he did not open it. Finally, his head showed through the window. Why are you banging on the door so hard? Jacob was mad. She flew to the window and reached for it. Don't you recognize your car? You don't need it anymore. Let me in the house and we'll talk. You're running away now. You'll get me in bed and you'll be the boss again. No, I won't. Go back to the Decembrist's husband and he'll be sarcastic to the end. Is that how you get jealous? I'm happy. Who do you want me to share with? Will I share you? Will you share with others? Not with my father. The girl figured him out. That's why you needed me to prove to yourself that you're better. A psychologist came into the bathhouse. No, you didn't. I don't need you at all. I will live here with a girl young, decent, and gentle. And you're boring. You belong in a whorehouse. I'll broom you out of here. You can't go on without me. You'll ruin the girl's life. Innocence is not your thing. You're just like your father. You just missed him. He confessed. My little bastard. Clark's eyes filled with tears. If you command it, I'll do whatever you want. I beg you, open up. There she went again. He closed the window in her face. I have your father's power of attorney for the money. Without it, you're nothing. Did she yell as loud as she could? Your blackmail won't work. Jacob's back out on the street. I'll get by. I'll earn my own money. But leave me alone. Let me breathe clean air. I'm letting you go forever. Live in your father's rented apartment. I don't mind. Just stay away from me. Jacob, I'll tell my father. He's with you. I don't know what he'll do. She was tearing her hair out of her chest in despair. Do whatever you want. I don't care, as long as I'm free from your yoke. To live like a normal guy. I don't need your poison of lust anymore. What are you doing? My boy, how can you do this? I love you more than life. I've torn my soul out. I idolized you. How will you live? My father gave me the money, not you. You're wrong. I've had an account opened for me for a long time. Clara, go away. You've sunk to the bottom of the pile. Is there no one to comfort you but me? The girl, gritting her teeth, grabbed the bag by the handles and dragged it along the ground. Soon, along with a block of dust, she disappeared behind the gates of the house. Jacob breathed a sigh of relief. He knew that if Clara had come in and touched his body, he would not have been able to resist, would have drowned in debauchery again. She drew him in, she gave him intoxicating pleasure, and he dissolved more and more into her. The guy realized that he would never have a life of his own. As long as she was around, he would not notice reality. Only lust and lust took over his soul. Eventually, he would lose his human form and turn into an insatiable animal. 5 years passed. Marlo sat still, and Jacob never heard from her again. Her father tried to track her down from prison, used his connections, but she disappeared, as if vaporized. True, the money from one of Marlo Sr.'s accounts disappeared with her. Jacob. Now it seemed he was completely free. The boy remembered with horror how the first time he had broken down at the mere thought of Clara. The body bored, and the soul rejected the silent image. In time, all passions began to be forgotten, and he began to live an ordinary life. Having finished school and institute, he got a job. His day invariably began with a cup of Americano. Coffee was available on his desk. When Jacob studied the entries in his diary, today he had several articles to write and process. After all, he had been a correspondent for the popular local magazine, Evening Leitsemansk, for a month now. He took a sip of coffee as the computer dipped burned, the drink invigorating. That's when the phone rang. Jacob, are you in the newsroom? He heard the voice of an old acquaintance of Holmes and Miranda's father. Yes, for many years she combined her work as a pathologist and part-time police expert. Yeah, I was gonna do some work. I've got a story for you. We just brought in a Jane Doe with no ID, no visible injuries on the body. What did she die of? We don't know yet. I'd love to have you on the case. I wish I could charge iPhones for you. Ceiling on the anatomical theater. Miranda didn't allow outsiders. But Jacob was allowed. For one thing, she had a long and hopeless crush on Marlo Sr. In the second place. She liked the boy's articles. They were truthful, based on facts without the slightest tendency toward jaundice. Jacob, of course, marveled at how one could maintain loyalty and feelings for his father for so many years. And it was also a mystery to him why the man had earned such loyalty and love. You couldn't find a woman like Holmes by daylight. Jacob cast an interested glance at her aged but well-groomed, not beautiful, a redhead with a scattering of freckles on her cheeks. Short, boyish haircut, a shrewd look in her blue eyes. Thin as a birch, and most importantly strong, determined. In general, involuntarily, in addition to respect, there is sympathy. Miranda, did the body of the sheet return at this moment? Or have I forgotten everything in the world? Dark, smooth hair, eyebrows like seagulls in flight, beautiful lips, straight, precise nose, perfect, swarthy body. There was no doubt in his mind that he was looking at the woman in front of him. You're not well, Jacob. The pathologist got worried. Looking at the defeated guy, very much he could not hold back. Tears spurted from his eyes. Jacob stepped out into the dark corridor and leaned against the cold wall. Soon his father would be coming out. One must try to pull himself together and find out what had happened to his wife. He never filed for divorce. He kept hoping she'd come forward to tell him about their affair, or hide it, which was better. Jacob took the pictures of the car. He said goodbye to Miranda and went to the police station, hoping to find out something about her recent life. Went straight to the office of his close friend, James Jackson, but he had not yet received any information from the Ministry of Internal Affairs database about the girl or her photos. Jacob showed all the photos to his buddy. Wow, what a sultry beauty. In her lifetime, right? Twirled it like she wanted to. When he whistled, he twirled. Through gritted teeth, said Jacob, "You know her." "I used to. I'll tell you sometime." It's a long and murky story. They spent hours enlarging the pictures to get a better look, but they saw no signs of violence. That's what James said. "We're not going to see anything on these pictures. She died accidentally. Assault or accidental. She didn't put up a fight. No scratches, no bruising on the body. Dress is intact. What happened to you? Girl? Expensive clothes, fancy manicure, well-groomed hair. What a grief for her loved ones. And she has no one but her husband." Jacob sighed. He's been looking for her for years. Found her. There. Who's the husband? Tell me, what's darker? Father, really. But why didn't you say anything? Yeah, our people were talking about this case, that he was wanted from prison. They found it when he was with her. I guess I wasn't in the suit. Yeah, that's right. You told me once that he got married. How am I gonna tell him now? I'm not gonna tell him anything. He's in poor health as it is. I thought he'd be strong and strong forever. Maybe he would have been if she hadn't disappeared. Did he give up after hearing that? Well, he still has to be officially notified. So there you go. And say, James, when he's home for 5 days, there's no ID on her. And we know the girl is Sarah Marlowe. Only then I didn't put my testimony into evidence. And there, while the investigation is going on, the father will be released. Okay, Jackson agreed. Have it your way. We need to know where she came into town from, where she was, why she came back, and why she died. Go ahead, get that information and bring it to me in a kiwi beak, and look for any witnesses who saw her alive. Jacob couldn't sleep at night. He remembered his and Clara's stormy past. He got out of bed, went to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of wine, then sat down to look at the pictures in his laptop, where he transferred them from his iPhone. Zoomed in on their makeup. The victim had a brightly colored evening outfit. Apparently was going somewhere new. Did she make it? We need to hit the restaurants, hit an underground casino. No sign of a struggle anywhere. Blissful smile on his face. I don't think he's ever been high before. But who knows? She had a passionate, uncontrollable nature. He was awakened in the morning by a call from Miranda Holmes. Put me to sleep. I'm not bleeding, she blurted out angrily as the blood was turned off. Even if she'd woken up, there was no chance of survival. An egregious case in my experience. What do the police know about the girl? Nothing. And no leads. Oh, by the way, was she raped? No. I'm going out tonight to look for information. My guess is she spent the evening or night out in public somewhere. She's dressed festively. Yeah, according to her stomach contents, she had a big meal somewhere before she died. And she's got foreign blood on her shoe heels. I'm typing. Jacob had breakfast, jumped on a streetcar, and in half an hour was in the editorial office. Ask off the chief to intrigue with the prospect of sensational news. Jacob, you're getting into trouble again. You haven't had your snouts cleaned enough lately. Joe ranted. A burly bearded man with round glasses, smiling at the boy. You like stories, don't you? If it wasn't for Jackson's support and help, you'd be in the hospital with fractures. Joe back then was not an intellectually challenged gangster. And that exsanguinated girl, that's a crime unheard of around here. Out of the ordinary, so to speak. She didn't have her purse, though. Maybe it was theft. But then why kill so brutally? The killer wasn't interested in sex with the victim. It's going to take me a long time to get to the bottom of this and help the police. Please don't distract me with your phone calls. Pass my pile on to someone else, whatever it is. The material looks unusual. Most importantly, knowing the tenacity of Marlowe Jr., in response only waved his hand, say, go ahead, go for it. Good luck. For 5 days, there was no word from the boy. At that time, his father returned from the colony. The man was unrecognizable. Got old and lost weight and called my son, but he wouldn't pick up. Good as usual. The spare key was on the shelf in the shed. John entered the house and made his way into the kitchen. There was a laptop computer on the table. There was a slit extending from it to the mains. "Where did you go in such a hurry, son?" He left the tech on. He sat down across from it and opened the lid, and the faucet glowed. Marlowe wrinkled his nose at the picture of the dead girl, wanted to slam the computer shut. Suddenly, his heart throbbed. He took a closer look at the picture and realized who was in front of him, and was literally dumbfounded. He wheezed and fell to the floor. John Marlowe woke up in his bedroom. Not usual were the aromas of clean linen and the freshness of roasted coffee beans. His son sat beside him. "How are you, Dad?" he asked thoughtfully, adjusting the blanket. "I'm all right. I've come down." "Clara died." "Yeah, I found out by accident when Holmes called me over. Thought I'd see a stranger. And then this happened. She was murdered. Why? I wish I'd known. But Daddy's still here. You rest and recuperate. You shouldn't be worried." "Oh, son, I lived only in the hope that I would find her and see her." And now Jacob's heart ached with pity, looking at his grief-stricken father. How could I tell him everything? Now he would kill them with his own hands. Let this secret never be revealed. No, and I'll keep silent. What does it matter now? We'll find the father of the murderers, believe me. "All right, son, I'll live while I wait," the man said, falling asleep. Jacob went to shower without appetite, swallowed a sandwich, and froze at the kitchen table in one pose, all pondering the results of his investigation. The state of mind was devastated. The story was too personal. There were too many white spots in it. He used to be interested in racy crime stories. Now a young woman who loved him had been murdered. Grief shattered his father. The secrets of their relationship darkened his soul. Jacob perked up. "It is necessary to call the editorial office. Joe has news, but please allow me to rest today. I'm at my limit. Have you been traveling?" The guy sighed heavily, walked to his room, and collapsed on his bed. He didn't wake up until sunset. He dialed Jackson. He's been collecting information on Clark, too. A lot of it matched. Turns out, right after she broke up with Jacob, she went to the countryside. She had a fake passport and soaked in lies. Life was the governor's mistress for a long time. The retired general's kept woman met with high-ranking bureaucrats. Jacob had visited the places where the girl had lately lived, and he was lying when he told his father he would find the killers. He'd already found the culprit. Only a few days ago, he had been sitting in a railroad car, amazed at what he had learned. Having stayed in the small Volga town for a very short time, he discovered not only the motives of the crime committed, but also looked into the eyes of the person who hated him. It was a woman. Of course, for men were favored voluptuously. Perhaps some would like to put her in her place for her willfulness and rebelliousness. But to kill still at the train station. Jacob learned that she had traveled to Minsk on false documents. The investigation was helped by photos of the girl, which Jacob had kept from the time of their close acquaintance. Curly, lush white blonde gladly told him that a local famous courtesan had bought a ticket from her. Only, she said, it was Lisa. Everyone here knew her. Cavaliers came to see the young woman from all over the region. As soon as an expensive foreign car drove off down the streets, everyone knew in which yard she'd stop. Lisa rented a comfortable private house in the town with a well-maintained yard and modern renovation. She never liked to do housework, so she had a housekeeper. Jacob found her on a neighboring street. The thin woman of about 50 years old with traces of former beauty on her face told him that, according to her information, Lisa had gone to the city to her old friend. To his delight, she told him her first and last name. Jacob shuddered. The name Kelly Dean had often been on Clara's tongue when they lived with her, the girl spending evenings at FGC hotspots, that classmate of hers had said. "Oh, right. I have her number on my cell phone." Without hesitation, Marlowe Jr. dialed it. Kelly picked up the phone and was immediately behind the hall. "How long it's been since she's heard from him. I went to the sea," she praised herself. "She's doing well on her own." Yes, alone. She didn't want to come with me. So you met in town recently? Yes, we met the night before I left. We went to a bar. We had a great time, like when we were young. She never stopped loving you. She kept asking me if I knew anything. I see. Well, I'll call you if you need anything. Okay, I'm on the phone. But let me ask you what you're calling for. And you're looking for a connection like old love never fades. You want to find her. No, I'll explain it all some other time. Later means never. Sad, sighed Kelly. I know you guys, and you're still living in the same place. Or did you move somewhere else? But none of the handsome like you did not ask to marry. I'm still with my parents. Shall we get together? I'll be back in 2 days. I'll think about it. I'll call you. Bye, Kelly. After this conversation, Jacob decided to have a conversation with Dean's parents. They were extremely surprised by his question about their daughter and her friendship with Clara. Although they were happy to be contacted by the correspondent of the local newspaper, Jacob showed them his identification. They calmly told him that the daughter was now vacationing on the Black Sea coast, about the fact that they began to communicate with Slaga in kindergarten and then at school. Slaga, because the mother abandoned, ran away from her husband with another. He brought her daughter up to speed, and she finished school with his support and died. And then in school and after, girlfriends never parted. They were together all the time. It was only 5 years ago that their paths diverged a bit. Clara moved away, and Kelly saw her less often, and then stopped talking about her friend altogether. Kelly and Jacob thought they'd had a fight, something they hadn't shared. Jacob didn't tell them about Clark's death, just asked about mutual friends and took their contacts. It was so strange to dig into the past of a woman who had almost consumed him with her insane lust for passion. Turns out, she was also a head-turner in school and excelled in her studies. Hunting for the stronger sex Clara began in her walls. It was clear because the men who told about her immediately chewed face, eyes lit up and palms covered from the guys. It's been years, and she still excites them. Though how long has it been since I myself got rid of the vicious attraction? The more people Jacob interviewed, the more obvious it became that Clara and Kelly really were, as they say, inseparable. People were sure to characterize their friendship. It was a strange relationship, a classmate said. A full-figured red-headed girl strolling through the park with a stroller. Jacob was curious what she meant. Why did you have that opinion? But she's always been a favorite, a leader. And in junior high, she had girlfriends who obeyed her. And then Kelly outshone everyone else. She's always seemed like the difficult one. Quiet, but she'd get her way. So she sang along to Clara's line. And soon she became an indispensable friend, like she fought off everyone. Dispelled all those who were with her. She didn't tolerate competition. She was arrogant and proud and with us. And everyone liked Slaga. She was outgoing and generous. We all thought that after school they'd split up because it was incomprehensible how such different girls could be friends for so many years. But Dean wouldn't let Clara out of her clutches. Do you think she wanted a lasting relationship with Clara? It's hard to know. She's a very shady lady. Jacob was the last one to interview Zhenka in Vasilkiv. According to the information he had gathered, he had previously been madly in love with Kelly. Jacob looked with interest at the man who was able to resist Slaga and chose her friend. They met near the city administration office. Jacob was approached by a short, stocky man. He shook his hand firmly. Why do you ask about them? Rick wondered, talking about how he perceived the girls' friendship in his school days. He scratched the back of his head as he saw them together in Minsk. Self-waste not shutting up. They didn't even notice me, even though I was passing close by. I thought about it, but wow, I haven't had feelings for Kelly for a long time. I've forgiven her. It's all in the past for me, and they still have a strong friendship. Forgiven for what? Jacob's on the rebound, so she wouldn't let Kelly go out with me. So she lied to me, told her we slept together, and I told her I loved her, when in fact, we didn't. Tell me, Rick, why didn't it happen? Because Clara is very beautiful. Men were crazy about her. She's just not my type. I don't like a predator, smiled the young man. I see. But thank you for the information and assessment of those long ago events. So, can you tell me what happened? Someone killed Clark. By the looks of it, one of our own. That's terrible. Of course, Rick's got his hands full. She was a bitch, but she didn't deserve to die. Yeah, hardly anyone would kill her for manipulating other people's feelings. You'd have to really hate her. I haven't come across one yet, Jacob reasoned. But it's a good thing I didn't kill her myself. He thought. Yeah, she seemed to have more sympathy in class than Kelly. They disliked her, forgave her a lot, but only because she was a favorite of Clark's. She even complained to me once that she was fed up with the role and wanted to step out of her friend's shadow. But then we had a conflict, and I do not know about the further development of events. Jacob was suddenly disturbed by this information. Kelly had not given him the impression of a loyal friend before, despite the fact that he had seen her several times. Intuition told the guy that behind the innocent appearance of the girl hides not noble motives. He decided for himself that he would meet her at the station and digest her. Jacob personally called her back and played the interested in a date beau. To his surprise, Dean came completely enthralled. I blatantly started toward him. Where are we going to go with you afterward? Will you rent a hotel? More like a girl on the phone. Do not chase horses. We need everything in order. First, I'll feed you at the restaurant. Then I'll take you to bed. What do you say? Agreed. Jacob shared his plan with them alive. They met in the evening in the city park. Let me back you up, James suggested. If she's the killer, nothing can stop her. Make sure she doesn't feed you to us. Criminals rarely change their MO. A girl might realize you suspect her, and Kelly's openness to intimacy could be a trap. I'll get a room near you. I'll introduce my operatives to you. James, it's unnecessary that I can't handle the girl. Trust me, Jacob. In the criminal underworld, a lot of people put on the guise of decency and appear weak. In reality, they're usually unscrupulous and ruthless. Well, agreed with Comrade Marlowe Jr. Having agreed, the guys left Jacob to the hotel and the police to the police station. He still had to study a lot of information on the case to formalize it properly. A day later, Jackson revealed to Jacob the new facts that his colleagues had dug up at Dean's place of residence. Jacob had no sooner finished his morning coffee in the hotel restaurant than the name James popped up on his iPhone. Jacob, I was right. These are the circumstances. Anyway, at the hospital where our suspect works, 6 young women OD'd in a month on her shift. Blamed it on them, like they weren't following doctor's orders. The victims were being treated for hypertension. Where'd they get it? Oh, in this day and age, diseases are getting younger. What's your diet? Yeah, and stress isn't exactly a rash. The pace of life. So why would she take their lives? What's her motive? I don't know that yet. And that evening, Jacob's phone was ringing off the hook. They were Kelly's attacks. Jacob, I want to go straight to my room. Will you get out of the way, get dressed up, or should I go to yours? Mine. He pretended to give up. The train arrived on schedule. Kelly jumped out of it happy and cheerful. She gave Marlowe a big hug and handed him her bag. Oh, it was so hot in the car, Dean shared. All night long my eyes stayed shut. She looked adoringly at the guy, flapping her long eyelashes. It seemed before him a naive and pure girl. Her gentle gaze, pure blonde hair, clear, blue eyes, open smile, confused Jacob. What kind of conniving killer is she? Cunning in her own mind. Maybe, but she's not smart. She goes wherever she wants, like a chicken. He put his arm around the girl's fragile shoulders. Now you're sleeping all chilly in the room. There Kelly took a shower, changed her clothes, tidied up, and only then went down to the restaurant with Jacob. James was nearby. After receiving a text message from Marlowe Jr., he broke into the room. There was a gym bag on the floor. Things were scattered on the bed. His keen eyes stopped on a very expensive purse. What was on the nightstand? It was impossible to buy one on a nurse's salary. James carefully opened it and examined the contents. He found a vial of Jacob coffee. Well, of course, although it doesn't mean anything yet. Meanwhile, Jacob was looking intently at his companion. Yes, Clara, she was certainly far away. But she was not unattractive. Short in stature, blonde, and pretty. He cast a glance at her slender calves and saw in the ankle area behind the living. But apparently a recent scar. It was still pink, healed a few days ago. Noticing his gaze, Kelly tucked her legs under the table. Why are you hiding your pretty legs from me? If you're going to give yourself away, Jacob is going to give himself to me. Oh, that's me. I had a friend who was too pretty, and everyone paid attention to her exclusively. That's why I still have a complex. Jacob flashed in my head. Though I learned to love myself, the girl continued. Didn't Clara call you while you were at sea? No, but she's probably in her little town there. Did it ever occur to you to ask how your friend was doing? Oh, come on, Jacob. Like you don't know how stiff she is. She only communicates when she wants to. I'm used to it, and I don't take any unnecessary steps in that direction. Well, I knew you weren't interested in me, but in your ex-girlfriend. The girl was starting to get angry. Jacob filled his glass with champagne and interestedly looked at Kelly, jealous. You're wrong. It's been over with her for a long time. You can't live a human life with someone like her. You become a slave. How sad is your voice and your look now? Dean stated. You loved her after all. I was sick of her, answered the boy. That's more accurate. It's not love, it's an addiction. Let's get on with the summer and the food. He nodded at the waiter who brought the hot food. You'll still need your strength at night. He winked at the girl. After dinner, the couple returned to the room. Jacob skillfully portrayed passion, fiercely possessed Kelly. After the intimacy, the girl completely melted. She did not live in his arms and smiled blissfully. I've never had such a thing. You are an exceptional lover, quietly whispered she. I can be. Jacob grinned to himself. But that's one of those things. You can't praise yourself, no one will. But Kelly could use a lesson from her friend. How to get men. Totally mediocre woman. But she's achieved her goal. Mademoiselle. Relaxed and unsuspecting. Indeed, she gave the impression of a carefree and happy girl's woman. Therefore, the appearance on the doorstep of James with an ID card in his hands was a complete surprise to her. He directly asked where your friend Clara, with whom you had lunch together. June 16, 2000 at the Oasis restaurant. And where were you at 2030 when she was killed? Whose purse did you have? Jacob joined the interrogation. Can you tell me how you got the wound on your foot? Did you unhook your shoe? Guys, I don't understand what's going on. Kelly, on what grounds are you asking me? I was with my friend at a restaurant. So what? Were you the last person to see her alive? And then she died. Jackson wouldn't stop. Oh, but I didn't even know that. Kelly theatrically flailed her arms. I saw her alive, healthy. Jacob walked over to the table and took his purse from it. He went to the bank, risking being made a fool of. Clara came to see me this afternoon with that purse, and it belongs to her. After saying that, Kelly expelled and started throwing her things and anything else she could get her hands on at the guys. But James and Jacob quickly coped with unmasked John Jackson, properly charged her with murder, told her to change her clothes, take with her the necessities of life, and took her out in handcuffs to the street. There she got into a police car and immediately tried them on. She did not scream anymore, only looked angrily at everyone around her. Further interrogations of the girl showed that the friendship was trouble for her. Kelly had always been possessed by an all-consuming envy and jealousy, so her friend had accepted death from this feeling. Dean's confession was frightful. Jackson allowed a friend to be present, and he heard the whole story in its entirety. As soon as I saw Clara in our class, I immediately hated her. She didn't have to do anything to get attention. She was the center of attention. The guys and male teachers loved her, and the girls loved her. She was always generous and easy to talk to. Yes, she was an idol. Everyone admired her, imitated her manner of speaking, dressing, moving. Only no one succeeded. Only she had naturally inimitable animal magnetism, as simply attracted to her, and that was the only thing that pissed me off too. I resisted as much as I could. I wanted to be better than her and more interesting to others. Only time showed that she was the one who had all the sympathy, the fancy clothes, the endless male attention. She'd give me something from her closet. I took it. How did it piss me off? Taking her socks, settling for the men she dumped. Was that fair? And in high school, she had a fight with me and Jenka, the only guy who chose me over her, but she didn't want him. He wasn't her kind of guy, and he wasn't interested in her, so she still couldn't let me be happy for a while. 2 I am Clara. She turned to Jacob the devil. It was important to her to possess everyone around her, and the only way to stop it was to wipe her off the face of the earth. All I did was wait for the moment of vengeance, and it came. I persuaded her to go to the seaside together, but before we went to a restaurant. She had a nice hotel in town. I was in a humble motel, and then it was just a matter of technique. I spiked her coffee, man. And as we were walking back through the wasteland, she felt sick, realizing she didn't have long to live. I revealed to her the true reasons for her behavior somehow weakened, and she managed to stab me in the leg with her heel. But then, as she passed out, I pulled a plastic system from my bag and pumped it out of her body. The blood quickly covered her with cardboard boxes, took my purse, and went traveling. I deserved it. There was plenty of money in Marienka's purse, enough for me and for clothes, and for a delicious meal, and for rented accommodation at sea. Tell me, my dear, why did you kill so many women in the hospital? James asked. I heard them talking about how happy and well off their lives were. I was jealous. I was also conducting an experiment. What dose to give in Marienka? Nobody suspected me there at all. Kelly Dean was smiling in court. It's not that much. 15 years for sweet revenge for a hated friend. Jacob wrote an interesting article and got a commendation from the editor-in-chief. He detailed the whole story to his father, clarifying his and Clara's past. Gradually, Marlowe Sr. began to recover, and Miranda Holmes visited him. Life fell into its own rut, and the Marlowe story was gradually forgotten. Calmness and dimensionality seemed to have entered their lives. But this was a deceptive impression. One day, Jacob had to go on a business trip, and his bus was involved in an accident. He woke up to the touch of hot hands stroking his face. He opened his eyes, but there was no way to see the man's face. Instead, there was a thick haze and a worried female voice. It obviously belonged to a young nurse. Thank God. You're finally awake. That's good. Now maybe you'll tell me your name. At least I'm questioning you. I'm gonna go get the doctor. Jacob tried to comprehend what was happening. The doctors came to my senses. I'm in a hospital. Why is there no picture of my last memory? My eyes hurt. I can't see anything. Where am I? Look, Jack, our John Doe is finally awake. Well, that's good to know. Driving all the way out here with no ID must have been in a hurry. He's a fighter, so he'll live on. Am I right? Sick, can you hear me? What's your name? Jacob took a deep breath, and his chest was crushed by pain. Tried to open his eyes, which were dark, so he whispered. Weakened his voice. Jacob, I'm Marlowe. Jacob, you mean. And where you live, do you remember? The boy strained his memory, but he couldn't remember anything about himself. A blank slate. Feels like he just started living today and mumbled. I don't know. I feel pain. Can't see out of my eyes. In such a helpless position, Jacob stayed in the hospital for more than 3 weeks. In contrast to his memory, his eyesight began to gradually recover as his physical well-being improved and his body regained its strength. despite the fact that the doctors quickly found out who he was and where he came from. He himself could not recover the former pictures of his life. James and his father came to visit him and talked about what he had been like as a young boy. But Jacob only shrugged his shoulders. His mind was empty. The doctor's explanation was that after the accident he had retrogrades, amnesia, and a condition. Oblivion could last a long time. Jacob had problems not only with his vision, but also with his musculoskeletal system. Multiple fractures meant he could only walk with a cane. His father took him home, and there Jacob was mortally bored with what to do. With his mind, he would do everything, but his body was limited in movement. His own existence seemed meaningless to him. He looked at old photographs, listened to the stories of his father and friends, but the memory was like a thick fog. Some vague images and outlines disturbed him at night, but there was no clarity in them. Day and night he began to read everything that came under his hand: magazines, newspapers, books, tried to find something familiar in the professions, literature and art, but no signs of identification with anything I could not identify with. And suddenly I began to write stories, essays. Words literally poured out of his soul. Thus were born his novels in the genre of fiction. True, only his father and his girlfriend Miranda read them. On one such evening, Jacob met one on the street. He was older. He'd been living without a past for 5 years, never remembered himself before the trauma. Talk to him. His wise musings on life were close to the guy. He even experienced a faint hope that the images of his former life would return likeness again. Pleasant communication brought the men closer together. And during the next meeting they told each other about themselves. Some raiders in broad daylight beat a new acquaintance, Marlowe Jr., took away his lodging, shoved some money and a one-way ticket, threatening not to tell anyone about the incident. If he wants to live, of course. That's how he ended up in Minsk. As long as he had money, he lived in hotels and ate in canteens. When the money ran out, he found a modest place to live and got a job as a janitor in the same neighborhood. Fate ordered so that both became lonely, unnecessary to society. Reading and a common view of many things asked him. One early morning, Jacob came out to him in the yard. A friend waved to him. He was deftly handling the Christmas tree. It was already warm, for it was a hot summer. Marlowe sat down on a bench, waiting for his friend to come to him. Suddenly, he heard a sound like a cat flickering or a baby crying. Thought he heard it. Turned around behind him near the trash can. Saw the baby carelessly tangled in Baykov's blanket. He quickly jumped up, picked up the blanket from the ground, and holding it to himself, ran to the hospital. It was difficult to breathe and walk. Injuries were still making themselves felt, but he went forward fiercely. After all, it is necessary to have time to save the baby's life. Was the mother's heart indifferent at the moment when she abandoned her child? Even animals do not do that to their offspring. Ran to the nearest department, took the baby immediately to the children's hospital. They were surprised that the lame Jacob so quickly overcame more than 2 kilometers. Returning home, the boy told his father and his buddy about the unexpected find. Marlowe Sr., at the request of his son, found out where the baby had been sent. It turned out that he saved the girl. She was treated at the Central Hospital. Jacob was very worried about her health, and with the help of James Jackson, who issued him a certificate of freelance police officer, was able to freely visit the rescued child. The head of the ward favored their meetings. When she learned that he was the one who had picked up the girl, she asked him, "What would you like to call her in life?" Sort of like godfather to her, "Now you come for Jenna." The name was pleasant to his realization. "It's a good name," the woman agreed. "That's how we'll do it." The foundling case went straight to Jackson's desk. He searched for the girl's mother, found her in the hospital. The story she told him was egregious, but her deed was not justified either morally or legally. At the hospital, James immediately sought out the doctor who had treated the young woman. "Well, my dove," my doctor looked at Jack with tired but kind eyes. "I can tell you it's almost a miracle, the beating, multiple concussions, but there's no irreparable consequence. The girl is strong and on the mend. Well, she didn't get hit in the stomach, so she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She was moved to a comfortable one-bedroom today. You're free to question her. Thank you, doctor. Thank James. What's the room number? 33. The doctor answered. Thank you too. He squinted a little. Maybe you can get along with her. She says she can't remember anything. But as a doctor, I can see there's nothing wrong with her memory. There are other motives for this silence. We should punish such a thing and not let it go unpunished. Before entering the girl's room, James staggered a little to the door. He didn't even want to talk to her, but he knocked. He heard a slightly hoarse knock in response. Come in. The young woman looked bad in the light of day, but he could tell that she was pleasant looking. Despite the large bruises on her face, Jack realized that in good health she was quite good looking. Her appearance could not be called standard. She possessed unnatural soft beauty. On the graceful face of the girl, as 2 stars shone, large cornflower-colored eyes framed by thick eyelashes on her cheeks' dimples, and thick blonde hair slightly waved. Hello, I'm an investigator. I'll be handling your case. Tell me how you were able to leave your daughter. I don't remember. The girl mumbled, embarrassed. It's all very curious. But what is your name? Do you remember? Camille. Camille. The girl blurted out and turned her back to the wall. James asked her a lot of questions, but she stubbornly maintained that she did not remember the events of the accident, without ever finding out anything. The policeman slammed the door irritably and left the room. But Jackson's stubbornness was to be envied. He was eager to see open cases through to the end. A couple of days later, he returned and confronted the young woman. In fact, she only wanted to forget forever her entire personal history that had led to such a violent denouement, starting from the moment she had first seen Stephen, her future husband. Their acquaintance had been very pleasant at first. He wooed beautifully, was caringly polite and responsive to any request of the girl. Camille grew up in a boarding school and did not remember her parents at all. And that's why she went to work right after graduation. She and Stephen worked in the same chain store and constantly communicated as colleagues. Camille was a novice specialist, and he on his own initiative immediately took patronage over her, helping her with advice and guidance. They became close on one of the corporate holidays, when they escaped together from a long but boring banquet. That same night, Stephen kissed her while walking her home. He courted like a real gentleman, was very bland and witty, gave small but nice gifts and flowers without occasion. Before Camille had time to remember, she found herself with him in the registry office. And as soon as she became his wife, their relationship ended. First of all, her husband forbade her to work. Then he audited her closet, threw out some of it. In the trash went short skirts and blouses with frank cleavage, fishnet lingerie, jewelry, and even cosmetics. Then Stephen began to disappear nights and waste money in the casino. His wife he did not allow to go to the nearest store, kept locked up, locked the apartment on the key, going to work or to a nightclub. He made scandals if she painted her lips without his permission, tore her underwear, and threw things off the balcony. Unfounded, accusing the spouse of lewd behavior. The man constantly humiliated his wife, tried to hurt with a word, reproached with a piece of bread. At the moment, when under the violent and mentally outbursts of his wife, Camille decided to leave her husband, she realized with horror that she was pregnant by him. The day she told her husband this, he beat her for the first time, deciding that the child was not his. Then the beatings became regular and more prolonged. Saving her unborn child, the young woman managed to escape through the back door of the women's clinic during a routine appointment to which Stephen accompanied her. She had her papers and some personal savings. A few days later, her husband found her at a close friend's apartment on the internet, beat her severely, forced her into a car, and drove her into the woods. At first, he probably wanted to burn her, as he doused her with gasoline, but then he just hit her over the head with a weighty board and threw her. There she heard her husband cursing her and wishing her death. Gathering her last strength, she took several days to get out of the forest slum. How had she managed it? She did not know ragged, hungry, beaten, and yet she didn't file a complaint against her husband. After the hospital, they wandered among acquaintances. Her husband wasn't looking for her anymore. He thought she died in the woods. Camille realized that if he found out that she was alive, sooner or later he would track her down and beat her to death. She was afraid for both herself and the child, so she decided to keep it a secret until she gave birth. Afterward, she dropped the baby off where Jacob found it. Jackson silently recorded her statement. "Don't you want your daughter back?" he asked. "No," the woman cried. She refused to give her up on the grounds that her husband would kill the baby girl with her. James instituted criminal proceedings against both of them. They were convicted and sent to a penal colony. Both spouses died there under unclear circumstances. The girl was left an orphan while her parents were still alive. Only Jacob could not leave an infirm child. He was attached to the girl with all his soul and knew a lot about her himself. How much she eats, how she sleeps, when she cries. When the baby got stronger, she was transferred to the baby house. He got a job there as a watchman for 6 months and stayed there near his eyelash. The girl grew before his eyes when she began to make the first steps. The guy began to seek permission for adoption, returned to the editorial office of Pravda, started there everything literally from scratch. But he got the job done in a matter of months. He rebuilt his reputation as a top journalist. Life had given Jacob a gift. Though he had lost his memory, he was now a father. He was given a little girl to raise. He became her legal guardian. A daughter became an important goal. The father helped raise her, and he was thrilled with his granddaughter. He found faith in himself too. He settled down. Raising a baby girl, 2 men, was not easy, but they put in it all the love and tenderness on which only were capable. Grew up with her from diapers to school. They truly loved Jenna with that unconditional incommensurability and love that elevates a person above the ordinary. Their hearts were filled with unselfishness and pure thoughts. The little girl was able to give them true happiness, except that there was no mistress in the Marlowe house, and when it seemed hope was completely gone, fate gave Jacob another chance for personal prosperity. Beautiful, statuesque, accurately honest red-haired girl sat in the carriage of a fast train and leisurely drank hot sweet tea to the rhythmic clatter of the wheels. In Jenna's memory flashed pictures of the recent past. The bustling capital city, its noisy highways and bright night lights were left behind. Her soul was longing for the long-awaited meeting with her native land, cozy home, and caring mother. She lay down. Drama quickly piled up and enveloped the girl's consciousness, and she instantly fell into a deep sleep. She awoke to the unceremonious shouting of the conductor. "Citizens, passengers, wake up. The train is arriving at Minsk Station. Standing time is 3 minutes." Jenna, fearing the unpleasant stupor caused by sleep, and quickly packed her things in a sports bag. Outside the window flashed cityscapes, and the train was beginning to break. Jenna stepped out of the carriage in the late afternoon, although it was still daylight. The station was empty. Only someone's face flashed in the window of the station and immediately disappeared. The girl took offense and sighed. How long had it been since she had been in Minsk? Moved on the way home. She went back to the past, to her childhood and youth. She remembered how she jumped on the sleepers and got a reprimand from her mother for such behavior. But this did not stop the girl and ride on the platform together with her friend Jenna Drusels and played classics. True, the station duty officer dispersed them, explaining that it was dangerous. But the bench with a comfortable backrest is special, wonderful, memorable. How many girls whose secrets she knows? Jenna took a seat. Her hand gently stroked the roughness of time, the planks. Here was the inscription preserved. Jenna plus Jacob. James had done it. He was in love with her, and she sympathized with Lech too. Now James was not the last person in Minsk. She read Jacob's article about his investigation of a terrible crime in the city, and it was committed by a girl out for revenge. What kind of terrible, soul-crushing feelings are there? Jen has been friends with Jacob since she was 5, ran into their house, and the boy's father was serving another sentence. Jenna still doesn't remember him now. She saw him a couple times when he came home from prison. But then all Jacob's friends were asked to go home, and Grandma Valia cried, wiping her face with her apron and kissing her son on the top of his head. Then all together again. Laser Paraski and the apple trees in their orchard. They played both hide and seek and catch up. Often James would join them. He was a terrible thug and a brawler when he was a kid. We used to go to school together over a small climb. It wasn't scary. After school, we'd walk on the playground, throwing their briefcases in a pile. Her father would take them for a motorcycle ride on a summer evening if the mood struck him. Jenna thought that even now she felt the track and pressed James against it with every fiber of her soul and cell of her body, as she had once done in the cradle of that motorcycle. Jacob was good. He was the tallest, sitting in the saddle behind his father. Jenna liked school. She was good at math, physics, chemistry, but she was especially excited to learn the basics of biology. She easily grasped the laws of development of living nature, in awe of learning about the unique processes that trigger the mechanisms of life at the cellular level. She liked to learn the physiology and anatomy of the human body, so she wanted to become a doctor at the age of 10. And in her youth, after reading Mikhail Bulgakov's novel Notes of a Young Doctor, the girl was finally confirmed in her desire. Despite the fact that Jenna had few illnesses and practically did not encounter doctors. As a child, the atmosphere described in the books was internally close to her. Already as a girl, she was ready for responsibility for someone else's life and health, treated all abandoned cats and dogs. She was interested in learning all the subtleties of this craft. And one more incident from her own life pushed her to choose her future profession. One day, she cut herself and a pustule appeared on her leg. Her mother took her to consult a surgeon. He, of course, prescribed treatment and dressings, and the girl often had to visit the children's polyclinic. She liked everything: their cleanliness, medicinal odor, white coats, and friendly nurses. After already in high school, the same surgeon came to their classes and told about his profession. After his speech, the desire to give themselves to this craft only strengthened. Perhaps it was the finger of fate, because even now she did not regret the decision that she chose the path of a doctor, but she really wanted to devote herself to children. Therefore, after the 3rd course, she went into pediatrics, and when practice began on duty in the hospital, the girl realized that she had chosen a profession to her liking. She had very good supervisors who discerned in her the future luminaries of pediatrics. This, of course, was presented by them as irony. But Jenna had indeed fallen into the hands of a unique specialist. Her mentor was a thoughtful doctor, teaching her to reason, analyze disease symptomatology, and think clinically, to see nuances in practice that textbooks didn't talk about. That's why Jenna Smith was drawn to this hospital. She was trusted there. It was as if she had already established herself as a boarding doctor. Already after she received her medical degree, the girl worked in the profile. Especially, she liked those days when the venerable doctors went on vacation and duty became independent. Then immediately felt the increased responsibility. After all, under all the documents was not the name of the mentor, but her own. In general, she had no regrets about her choice. Professionally, she was growing, gaining experience, and was satisfied with everything. But her personal life did not work out. No, there were plenty of suitors, but only her heart was long occupied. Jenna's memories were interrupted. Her mom ran towards her across the tracks, worried and aged. "Jenna, what are you doing? I'm meeting you on the platform and you're not here." "Don't worry, I raided the memorials. You said you couldn't make it." The girl rushed to hug her. "Yes, my employee didn't show up. No way we're gonna do this. A hole in the fence to close." Vasilchikov, taking her mother under her arm, Jenna smiled broadly. "Even though she's changed, she still smells just as delicious. Herbs and milk. Mom's house is quiet all around, not that in a frenzied, ignoring Shield's priceless joys of life. Everyone's flying somewhere, all dazed. Their faces are stamped with universal importance, and in their eyes indifference to their neighbors. What can you do? The rhythm of the capital. At home, everything was as before. The same curtains, perfect cleanliness, the smell of freshly cooked fresh soup. Everything was the same. And what could change? As if hearing her daughter's thoughts, Cindy answers, "There's only no man in the house. It's hard to manage alone. But I don't need anyone after your father. You'll get some rest and we'll go and see him off. I've tidied up the grave. Mom and Aunt Rick Jackson. They live on Zareknaya Street. Where will they go? Everything suits them. The capital doesn't beckon with its lights. We pensioners have our own life. Gardens, orchards, and in the center there are houses like Marlowe's. Here they are with excitement," asked Jenna. "Yes," the woman sighed, covering her mouth with her hand. Jenna looked at her mother's changed face. "What is it, James?" Also in the newsroom, John left the past. He works as a caretaker at the orphanage. That's where James worked, while the girl he rescued was being cared for. "What girl?" "Oh, Jenna. Everyone here knows the story. I didn't tell you. You were so fond of him when you were young, and when he got a stepmother in the house, he forgot all about you. Somehow I got out of it. I knew then that we were no match for them. I guess she forbade him to be around you." "Really?" Jenna was surprised. "Not married," Cindy hastened to add. "After the accident, he lost his memory. He doesn't remember anything." Tears came to Jenna's eyes. How could it be? Why would a guy do such a thing? After such a message, the girl barely touched her mother's literate things, ate hastily and without appetite. She wanted to be alone. It was too sad news she had learned. Jenna got up from the table. "Thank you, Mom. Don't look for it. It's a culinary masterpiece. That you barely moved to this masterpiece." The girl's mother sighed. "I've been so excited about so many things. I'm going to walk to our school." Go, Jenna. Maybe your heart will calm down at home." As soon as the door shut behind her daughter, Cindy sank tiredly into a chair. Would Jenna have left here if it hadn't been for her unhappy love? Jacob had been the only one she had breathed since she was a child, and everything was going so well for them. And then, like a whisper, he just walked by like a stranger. And he had his eye on Jenna. I saw it. I'm a good judge of these things. It was like the Snow Queen in a book, like a guy's heart for a lollipop from a piece of ice. And Jenna walked along the forest clearing, breathing in the fresh air. Grasshoppers rolled merrily in different voices. Birds sang. The wind swayed the majestic crown of trees. Hearing the cuckoo, she stopped, decided to try the game, as in childhood. If it's even, then the wish will come true. And now I'm wondering if I'll meet the person I'm thinking about. I looked around. There was no one there. The old game didn't work. She was sadly reminded of the old days. She didn't realize that the object of her thoughts was now moving toward her. 5 minutes later, they bumped into each other on the forest path. He gazed intently at the young woman, and suddenly, like a flash, like an epiphany, all those stories of his life that James's father had told him about came alive, sparkled with warmth and vividness, and he realized why he had given his daughter that name. Because the relationship with Jenna was the purest page of his destiny. It was possible to remember them countless times they warmed and pleased, begged. Memory relegated him to the days of Marlowe and Smith's happy youth. I tell you again, if you don't stop making noise immediately, I will have you thrown out of class. I urge you to concentrate. Final exams are coming up. Jana Vladimirovna, the physics teacher, corrected her glasses with Poland on the tip of her nose and continued explaining a new topic. The door was ajar to the classroom. Slowly surfaced breasts, and then dimensional bodies. Kathy, the headmaster. Excuse us a moment. Adriana. She walked to the back of the room. There in the courtyard of Jackson High School you were catching. She turned to the students and pointed to James, who had entered with her. Please love and pity him. Starting today, I'm taking him under my control. If you skip class, you'll have to deal with me." Jackson said hello, scrutinized his classmates, and made his way to a vacant back desk. "But you're a fruit." Jacob winked at his friend. He shrugged indifferently and nodded to the girl. A couple of days later, as a May thunderstorm rumbled outside the window, the Jackson family was preparing for their son's 21st birthday. A statuesque black-haired woman was closing in on the kitchen table. A handsome man with a somewhat sly expression watched the game cooking in the oven. He carefully opened the cupboard door, once again filled his glass with Wermich, and sat down at the kitchen table, happily holding out the amber drink. James stepped out of Spain, strode into the hall. Nancy stopped arranging the dishes on the table and looked thoughtfully at her son. How fast has time flown by? He was a baby, and now he was a grown-up boy. She slowly sat down on the stool. Tears came to the woman's eyes. "James, have you grown up? Graduated from high school and into the army." Quietly, she mumbled and sobbed. "Mom, stop getting wet." He hugged her and gently wiped her wet cheek. The Nancy doorbell rang. Immediately fussed at the table, the shining face of Jacob appeared in the doorway. He came in and looked at his friend appraisingly. "You've made your point." He commented on Jackson's strict new suit. Quietly, James put his index finger to his lips. "Now the parents will be gone. Change. A present, right?" He explained. "I don't want to offend." Jacob nodded understandingly. "How's the chicken?" Nancy shouted toward the kitchen. When Rick heard his wife's voice, he rummaged around the kitchen with a glass in his hand. Finally, he set it down behind a flower pot on the windowsill and walked into the hall. His wife looked up at him. "Yes, a cooked game," she said. Rick stepped in and shivered, allowing his wife into the kitchen. She opened the oven, pulled out a baking tray. The crust was covered with a pink-brown crust. The sweet smell of meat and seasonings filled the room. It was done. She turned off the stove, then took a ravioli and a bottle of Wermich from the cupboard and silently handed it to her husband. But all the guys turned. She turned to Jacob and James. "Make your own mashed potatoes. You'll be splitting up. Knock on the wrong door." She opened the door and walked out of the house. Nancy was called out by her husband. "Why did you turn around?" "She forgot to take off her apron." Nancy laughed, took off her apron and threw it over her head. Her spouse sidestepped the grinning boys. Jacob deftly caught it on the fly. Soon the cake arrived with the delivery. Accepting it, James bowed theatrically. "Thank you heartily for such an appetizing birthday present for my best friend. May it be yours." The bakery clerk was startled and hurried to close the front door. James went back to the apartment, went into the hall, and put the cake on the coffee table by the window. Then drained the water off the potatoes. "I'll have the potatoes," he called Marlowe over. "And I'll go and change my clothes." On the whistle and under the nose rhythmically melody. Jacob smoothly opened the refrigerator, took out milk butter, and plunged into the process of cooking mashed potatoes. When the dish was done, he tangled the pot tightly in a terry towel, grinned contentedly, and headed over to his friend's house. James had already changed into a dark blue Empire, tight blue jeans, and was triumphantly retrieving 2-liter bottles of vodka from under the couch. Jacob whistled happily. "And I thought I'd have to settle for a crown. How did you manage? Did your father show solidarity?" James handed the bottles to Jacob. "He's a world-class entertainer." Jacob winked at his friend, went into the hall, and put the bottles on the table. Insistently assertive, the bell rang. James headed for the front door and opened it from the threshold. The guests gave a friendly shout of "Happy birthday! Happy birthday!" "Thank you." James bowed playfully, rolling the whole thing up. The noisy crowd barely fit in the narrow hallway. James immediately rushed over to the tall, slender brunette, Sveta Maxikova. He helped her take off her windbreaker, placed it on a hanger, and sat down carefully, removing her shoes from her flawless feet. The classmate tipped her head slightly. Sveta laughed contentedly. James stood up. She wrapped her arms around his waist and lightly touched her lips to his cheek. The young man, then closing her arms, confidently took him under her arm, and they walked to the table. And Jacob accepted the clothes from his companion's John, and looking at the filled hanger, he walked to the bedroom, folded the jackets on the sofa, and returned to the guests. They were rattling their plates in friendship, pouring themselves cold appetizers. James was pouring liquor. When the doorbell rang again, at last Jacob's favorite, Smith, showed up. I don't like her very much. I only invited her for a friend. Oh, you're lying. I wouldn't mind a light chuckle myself. With feline grace, putting her foot on her leg. Yes, yes, she cast a sly glance at Jacob. He was in no hurry to open it. James patted him on the shoulder. I'll get it. Marlowe waved his head negatively and headed for the front door himself. It really was Jenna. Happy birthday, James. She greeted Jackson. You don't mind my company? No, he smiled. Come on in. You can undress in my room. He nodded guiltily toward the coat rack and strode toward the bedroom. Jacob will show you out. The girl nodded and followed Marlowe. The room was in semi-darkness. Jacob held out his hands to help the girl take off her cloak. With a familiar motion, she threw it off and put it on the back of the couch. Let's go to everyone. Yes. 12 pairs of eyes. Hand in hand, they appeared in the doorway for a moment. There was silence in the room. James flew over to Jenna and pulled her to the table, taking a seat next to him. Jacob sat down next to Sveta across from them. So Jackson rose from his seat. Finally, everyone is gathered. So let's have a toast to my coming of age. And wish me a happy birthday. Happy birthday. The guests cheered in the midst of the fun of the light. Dancing with James from behind his shoulder, watched Jenna. Something about her was beginning to annoy her a lot. Imperfect, sure. But there's something about her, she pondered. The boys are bursting at her. Soon, they'll break their eyes. Beautiful, thick, golden-colored hair, slightly oval, not falling below her shoulders. She's not badly built, but she's clumsy. I'm much more graceful. The dress is not bad. Straight, one thin khaki color. It's a good eye color. The chest and the cleavage is nice. What can I say? She has taste. Her legs are slender, but mine are longer and much prettier. Her eyes are either gray or gray-green almonds. You can see the shape. That's where she gets her rest. Mine are just huge lakes. Can you drown? Yes, but what's that look in her eyes? The caressing, thrilling look of sensuality. Skin as pale as milk. Lips very beautiful, medium-sized, straight nose. Sharp chin, self-taught. Still, she is very attractive. Svetlana pressed her lips together resentfully. Something my queen frowned. James kissed her ear and whispered, You are the most beautiful. She's a long way from you. He nodded toward Jenna. Maxikova shuddered. She ran her slender fingers through James's thick hair, looked into his mesmerizing black eyes. And you know all this about me. And she wrapped her arms around his neck and gratefully penetrated his lips. He responded to the girl, but he himself furtively still admired Jenna. What a thing Zamora was, and how had she blossomed. A sweet, luscious, young girl, but too right. What to do with her? Jacob couldn't help but admire the girl from childhood together. It wasn't until recently that he realized who she had become to him by her eyes. An open smile, an infectious laugh. Literally, everything about her seemed warm and familiar to him. He stood up and asked Smith to dance. But the tune suddenly ended. James quickly jumped to the music center, set a new track, and the music spilled into the room. That clever rascal, drowning out the human voices. Jacob put his arms around Jenna. Her closeness made him feel infinitely happy. She tossed mismatched hair over her face. Jacob said slightly audibly, Your hair smells of the summer variety. Really? She looked embarrassed. You don't like it? No. He gently touched her lush curls with his hand. Do you like it? Very much. The girl laughed softly, and Jacob felt that she relaxed in his arms. The girl, swaying to the beat of the music, rolled in the palm of her hand a delicious pink apple. She looked at Jacob with Jenna and smiled contentedly. The feeling that had erupted between them pleased her. Sure, Jacob was a prominent guy, handsome with a charming smile and monarch eyes. He was an object of attention for the opposite sex, but James had been her loyal admirer for years. Yes, and his looks were demonic. She looked in his direction, tall, slender with perfect facial features. He feels every movement of my soul. A smile plays across his face. He gets up from the table, walks over, touches my neck, gently runs his fingers through my hair. There is no peace next to James. Girls are crazy about him, and so am I. I'm in love with his searing black eyes and hair the color of a crow's wing. His humor, his plasticity. I'd tear anyone apart if she wants to take him away from me. Jenna. All right, that's it. I mean, you gotta admit it to yourself. Good girl. The girl, in an impulse, hugged James, pressed tightly against him. A small shiver shook her body. Abruptly, she took a big bite of apple. Droplets of juice appeared on her lips. Sveta looked at James, and in her blue eyes danced the fires of fierce, all-consuming passion. The music ended. Jacob and Jenna stood in the middle of the room, unable to look away from each other. Then they sat down at the table, and without paying attention to others, enjoyed each other's company for the rest of the evening. By midnight, the guests began to leave. James, who had been drinking a lot, came up to Katya and took her hand. I've decided to see you off after all, baby. He staggered a little. The girl gently withdrew his hand and waved her head negatively. No, I'm with Jacob. Let's go retired. Sveta chuckled, holding out his jacket to him. James slung it over his shoulder swaggeringly, clapped his friend below his back, and followed the others outside. Jacob helped Jenna put on her coat, and they went downstairs. The street smelled of rain and spring freshness. The girl took Marlo under her arm. And if we get that prologue back, she extended her arm, we'll be at my house in 10 minutes. I know a longer way. Jacob winked at the girl. Normal heroes always take a detour, she laughed. All the way they chatted, and Jacob caught himself thinking that he was easy with this girl, carefree, simple, and heartfelt. And so the newfound happiness did not last long, for then Clara burst into his life, wrapped up in his vicious passion. She stole his father and his only love from him. Jenna, of course, hurriedly left the city, went to Moscow. There she entered the medical school. In general, he lost her. Along with happy memories, Jacob was covered with a dark past that he spent with Clara. About it, he now could not think without disgust. Away. He didn't want to drown in it again. He was admiring. Jenna hadn't changed at all. Even better now. He stepped closer. Her hair smelled the same. Her eyes looking at him with the same love. No, it can't be. Am I dreaming? I just came for 3 days. I haven't been away for almost 4 years. My mom was scolding me. How are you doing? Jenna pretended not to know about Jacob's problems. He acted like he didn't have a blackout. It's okay. Let's go for a walk. I live with my dad. And I have a daughter, and he has a granddaughter who's heard about this story. What a horror. Well done. You did the honorable thing. I guess we're responsible for those we tame. What's her name, Jenna? Oh, great. So we're namesakes. Yeah, Jacob smiled. You'll get to know her. Anyway, they walked hand in hand for a long time, like they used to. They reminisced a lot about childhood and youth, laughed a lot, especially long laughs about how he would walk her home, choosing the long way around to be near her longer. Jenna noticed that Jacob was limping, but still did not ask anything. He opened up on his own. He told how he had miraculously survived the accident, how he had been treated in the hospital for a long time, and then spent a year recovering. With pain in his voice, he told about how he had found the girl. And then suddenly he asked, "Are you married?" "No," laughed Jenna. "I have not met someone like you," and blushed. Jacob pretended not to notice the embarrassment of the girl and hiding, seized by his excitement, said goodbye at her house. But it's okay for now. I'll see you around. I see your mom. She's watching out the window like she did when she was young. You're coming to meet your namesake. Of course I will. Yeah, my mom's a Sherlock Holmes in a skirt. While Jacob, despite being tired from the road and excited to meet her, Jenna stayed up all night. Thoughts swirled endlessly in her head. How come their paths had diverged back in high school? Why had he become indifferent? It was obvious even now that he needed her. She felt that Jacob truly loved her. How today his eyes shone with happiness. You can't hide that. Yes, he did. He'd gotten his memory back in one fell swoop. As soon as he saw her, that means something. And she, oh, how she wanted a confession. But it didn't happen. Something unknown to her had happened in the past, and today he was silent. For the next 2 days, the old friends were inseparable. Little Jenna joined their company. They took many walks in the forest belt, picked strawberries together, counted cuckoos and shrieks together, and laughed. They were good together as they had been long ago in their school days. Daughter Jacob in such an atmosphere felt at ease, as if in the company of peers. But it was. Jacob and Jenna immersed themselves in their happy childhood. Jenna's mother, when her daughter ran home for a snack, she just shook her head. And when she was about to walk her to the night train and heard that Jacob was going to do it, she took a little offense, but only a little, because she understood. They stood on the platform, hushed, watching the approaching train. Jenna's heart plummeted somewhere downward. She grabbed Jacob by the neck. I've always loved you alone. Jacob kissed her back long and tenderly. I know, kitten. I just realized everything too. Only now it's probably too late. Jenna didn't answer him. She got into the carriage all the way back to the capital. Only nothing went well for her there. And in a month she was rushing to Minsk again. When the train approached the station of her childhood, she saw a young man sitting on the very bench boldly labeled Jenna, plus Jacob took a closer look, and Jacob jumped off the foot of the carriage, rushed to meet him. And he was already limping a little too, and rushed toward her. Did you not leave here for a month? The girl whispered in his ear. Yes, I waited. He laughed and hugged Jenna tightly. I felt today that you will come back, and I will not let you go anywhere now. Jacob hugged the girl even tighter. Let's go, my love. Tears of joy spurted from Jenna's eyes. They flowed down her cheeks, and Jacob tried to stop them with his kisses, saying, Come on, Jenna, we're together now. It's okay. And taking hands as in the good old days, and immediately went to his house, dazed with happiness. We didn't talk the whole way. And what to say when everything is clear? It was very good for the two of them.